Chapter 2674. Get out. Rongyue Tianlan's voice was cold. The South Sky Emperor who followed behind quickly said, "This quiet room hasn't been cleaned for a few days, let them clean it up. Don't worry, they are quick, very soon." He shut his mouth before he could finish his words. Because this Eighth Highness just waved his sleeves, and after a faint blue light flashed, the entire room seemed to have been cleaned by water, not a speck of dust was left. Rongyue Tianlan didn't stop walking, and put her on the bed in the quiet room. Usually, when a girl was poisoned, her body was weak, and she was carried by a man. Under normal circumstances, she would faint, and when she woke up, she would find that the wounds on her body had been treated. That would be more dramatic, and not too embarrassing. However, Ji Xinyu's nerves had always been very strong. She was clearly very dizzy, her vision was very blurry, and her body was very weak, but her mind couldn't be any clearer. She clearly felt that Rongyue Tianlan had been carrying her, and even if she didn't want to, she couldn't break free. His embrace was very warm, and the faintly discernible fragrance on his body had been dense at the tip of her nose, making her irritable for no reason. She even suspected that the fragrance on his body actually had a refreshing effect. She had been disguised as a man for many years. Although she was open-minded and often drank and ate meat with men, and went on adventures to fight monsters, she understood that she was a girl, and she still paid attention to the distance between her and those people, trying to minimize physical contact as much as possible. At most, she would pat on the shoulder or the back. But now, she was being carried in a man's arms. This feeling of her body floating in the air and completely handing her weight to another person was very uncomfortable, and she felt very insecure. It made her body stiff from the beginning to the end. Until Rongyue Tianlan put her on the bed, she secretly sighed in relief. Her body moved, and she wanted to sit up subconsciously. A hand was placed on her shoulder, and Rongyue Tianlan leaned over to look at her. "Don't move." Ji Xinyu looked at him warily, her eyes wide open. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her appearance, and his mind was slightly shaken. He vaguely felt that he had seen her like this before, but he couldn't remember where. She looked like a little girl now. Rongyue Tianlan softened his voice, "Don't be afraid, I will cure you." Only then did the South Sky Emperor interrupt, "I have already called the Imperial Doctor, he will be here in a cup of tea's time." "No need. The fire dragon poison cannot be treated by ordinary Imperial physicians. You go out and send someone to guard this place. Before I leave, don't let anyone enter this place." Rongyue Tianlan ordered. The South Heaven the Arch was stunned. "Eighth Highness is proficient in medicine. I remember that you didn't understand this 3,000 years ago. Just because I didn't understand it 3,000 years ago doesn't mean I won't understand it 3,000 years later. If you continue to nag and delay the treatment of her, I'm afraid that her skills will be completely crippled before she can serve you." Rong Juishan's voice turned cold. At this point, the South Sky Emperor couldn't say anything else. He looked at the two people lying on the bed and suddenly had an idea. "All right, then I'll have to trouble your Highness 8th Prince to take care of my daughter. I'll go arrange it now." He turned around and strode out. Only the two of them were left in the large quiet room. Ji Xinyu's hair stood on end. It wasn't that she had never been alone with a man before, but that was only when her skills were extremely high and she could protect herself. Now, although her mind was clear now, she was still conscious. Chapter 2675. Although she was conscious now, her body was extremely weak. All her skills seemed to have disappeared, and her hands and feet were as limp as mud. Rongyue Tianlan was sitting right beside her, which made her extremely nervous. Rongyue Tianlan looked down at her, who was like a little hedgehog, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. "Afraid of me?" Ji Xinyu pursed her lips, her eyes full of caution. Rongyue Tianlan sighed, your vigilance is unreasonable. I came here this time to break off the engagement with you. If I wanted to do anything to you, why would I break off the engagement? He touched her forehead with one hand and said seriously, so, don't think too much. I just want to treat your illness. These words were obviously comforting, but it was also a little hurtful. Ji Xinyu did not buy it. I can actually treat this injury myself, you don't have to worry about it. Ha! Rongyue Tianlan raised his eyebrows and withdrew his hand, really? Of course. I often treat my own injuries, I'm very skilled. Ji Xinyu replied proudly. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her proud little face and nodded, if that's the case, very good. Then get up and try to treat the scratch on your calf. He stepped back and looked at her with his arms crossed, as if he was going to watch from the sidelines. She could treat it herself, as she was an expert at it. Because Ji Xinyu often practiced martial arts, it was inevitable that she would often get injured. She was the only female disciple in her sect, so when she got injured, she learned to treat it herself and would not ask others to do it. After completing her apprenticeship, she walked the Jianghu and suffered countless injuries. Naturally, it was not convenient for her to ask others to treat it for her, so she did it herself. Over time, she had become an expert at bandaging wounds. She could even bend her arm and treat the wounds on her back herself. Her independence was not ordinary. Now, she only suffered a claw wound on her calf, thigh, stomach, and collarbone. The wound was only scratched by the tip of the claw, it was not more than half an inch deep. She also sealed her acupoints in time to stop the bleeding, so this injury was nothing to her. As for the weakness in her body, it was probably because she used too much energy fighting the fire dragon and used the blink technique to rush. She would be fine as long as she had a good rest. She was well aware of her own injuries. They were not as serious as what Rongyue Tianlan had said. She took a light breath and slowly sat up by the side of the bed. Her body was too weak. Just this movement made her sweat profusely, and the wounds on her body that were no longer painful began to burn. She endured the pain and leaned her back against the railing of the bed. Her fingers touched her trousers and she looked at Rongyue Tianlan, who was not far away. He was looking at her with bright eyes. Can you go out? She had some injuries on her body that were not suitable for men to see. No. Rongyue Tian answered straightforwardly. Ji Xinyu. Why? I'm afraid that after I go out, you'll faint from fright and I won't be able to save you in time. Rongyue Ishanlin simply found a chair and sat down. With a swoosh, she opened her folding fan and shook it twice. Ji Xinyu, faint from fright. Did he think that she was a delicate young mistress? What kind of wounds had she not seen in her life? She had even seen disemboweled people. Ji Xinyu was too lazy to argue with him. She raised her hand and pulled up her trousers. She decided to treat the wound on her calf first and let him see that she could handle it well on her own. She pulled up the loose trousers neatly, and then, she stared. Chapter 2676. Her calf was hit by the fire dragon's claw, leaving a half-foot long and half-inch deep wound. But now, the wound had disappeared and was replaced by a layer of red scales that covered the surface of her wound. She instantly had goosebumps all over her body. Although she was brave, she had trypophobia. At this moment, when she saw the dense scales, her scalp exploded, and her originally morbidly bright red face turned snow-white in an instant. She was already very weak, and she forced herself to sit there, but after being frightened, her vision turned black, and she leaned back. Behind her was the hard headboard, and if she leaned back like this, the back of her head would definitely make a sound, and she might even faint. The moment she leaned back, she was mentally prepared for the pain at the back of her head, but she didn't expect that she didn't feel any pain even when she was lying on the ground. The ground was not hard, and it was very soft, with a faint plum fragrance. A faint voice sounded in her ear, "Fortunately, I have foresight." Ji Xinyue raised her head stiffly, and met Rongyu Ishinlan's sparkling eyes. This person was still sitting on the chair just now, but in the blink of an eye, he teleported to the front of her bed and caught her with one arm, and she was lying in the crook of his arm at the moment. Ji Xinyue didn't even see his afterimage when he teleported. This skill, Rongyu Ishinlan placed her safely on the pillow, and asked her slowly, "Are you frightened?" More than frightened, she was almost scared to death. Although Ji Xinyue was always calm, her voice trembled at this moment. How did I grow scales? On the other wounds. She tried to feel it, but she only felt an itch, exactly the same as the feeling on her leg. If her whole body was covered with such disgusting scales, Ji Xinyue's forehead was covered in a layer of cold sweat. Rongyu Ishinlan looked at her, and didn't have the heart to hurt her, but he still told her the truth. The wounds are the same, the scales on the other wounds are only more, not less. This time, not only was there cold sweat on Ji Xinyue's forehead, her whole body was sweating, and her face was even paler. How did I get these scales? Rongyu Ishinlan said indifferently, "That fire dragon's teeth are indeed the most poisonous, but its claws also have a kind of poison. When you were scratched by it, if you applied the antidote in time and meditated for an hour, you would be able to get rid of the poison completely. But you wanted to be brave, and immediately used the 1,000 miles in a breath technique after being injured, so the poison went directly into your skin, and the scales grew." This person was very experienced and knowledgeable. He actually saw that she used the 1,000 miles in a breath technique. It seemed that not only was his martial arts abnormal, but also his eyesight was also abnormal. "How do you treat this wound? Can the scales be removed?" Ji Xinyue stared at him anxiously. From his tone, he should be able to the wound, he should be able. The scales should also be removed, right? Rongyu Ishinlan sighed. "It's a little difficult." Ji Xinyue's heart sank. She raised her eyes to look at him. "What do you mean? You mean you can't treat it either? Then what you said to my father just now? It's easy to save your life and even preserve your martial arts, but it's quite difficult to completely remove these scales." Rongyu Ishinlan interrupted her to explain. She had to carry these scales for the rest of her life. Perhaps it was because of that special environment, but Ji Xinyue had actually given up on herself deep down, and didn't care much about her body. Chapter 2677. When she was injured, she only needed to bandage it so that it wouldn't bleed or fester. As long as it healed, it would be over. Therefore, there were many scars on her body, which were not as smooth and delicate as her little face. Now, adding a few scales to those scars was nothing. At most, people would gossip about her being a monster, which was not worth much. The only thing that she couldn't stand was the numbness in her scalp when she looked at these scales. Maybe it would be fine after she got used to it. Anyway, it was hidden in her clothes, and only she could see it in the future. She would just look at it less. Therefore, when she heard Rongyu Tianlan's words, she heaved a sigh of relief. "It's good that I can keep my martial arts." With martial arts, she could protect herself. Rongyu Tianlan choked. He looked at her and asked, "You don't care about these scales? Didn't all girls like to be beautiful? If there was a cut on her body, it would be like the sky was falling. Why did she?" Ji Xinyue was calm and collected. "I care, but it can't be helped if it's not easy to remove, right? Leaving these scales. It's just a little ugly. Anyway, no one will see it. I won't look at these places in the future." Rongyu Tianlan was speechless. He chuckled. "How can no one see it? In the future, won't your husband be able to?" He paused. If he continued, it would seem frivolous. Moreover, he felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. Ji Xinyue closed her eyes. Worry about it tomorrow. That husband might still be in my mother's belly. What's the point of being so calculative now? She had already made up her mind. After breaking off this engagement, she would be truly free. In the future, she would walk freely in the Jianghu without any intention of marrying. Anyway, she wouldn't go home easily. Her parents couldn't force her to marry even if they wanted to. Living alone was actually quite good. She could eat her fill and the whole family wouldn't be hungry. She didn't have to worry about this and that. She felt that this idea was quite good and intended to carry it out to the end. However, she didn't intend to share this idea with Rongyue Tianlan. Otherwise, he might think that she didn't want to marry in the future because she was hurt by him. She wanted to be a chaste woman for him for the rest of her life. Therefore, she casually said this. Her tone was unusually free and easy. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her indifferent look and did not know why there was anger in his heart. He did not say anything, but suddenly raised his hand and rolled up half of her trousers. His movements were so fast that Ji Xinyue felt a chill on her leg and jumped in fright. She subconsciously retracted her leg. What are you doing? Rongyuetian's gaze fell on half of her leg, and the smile on her lips turned cold. Her skin was actually very good, white and tender. Her legs were also very good-looking, straight and slender. However, on this leg, there were countless scars of various sizes. There were scratch marks, tear marks, sword marks, and even bite marks from wild beasts. Some of these scars were deep, some were shallow, some were deep, some were old, some were newly added. Layer upon layer, the large scars crushed the small scars. It was a ghastly sight. Rongyue Tianlan had treated at least 8,000 patients in her life, if not 10,000, but this was the first time she saw a girl with so many scars on her body. And this girl was his fiancée. What happened to these scars on your body? As he spoke, he rolled up the other leg of her trousers, and even rolled up her sleeves. Ji Xinyue wanted to resist, but she didn't have the strength. She could only watch as her limbs were exposed. Chapter 2678. There were many scars on her limbs. It was not beautiful at all. It could even be called ugly. However, these ugliness were all exposed in front of Rongyue Tianlan's eyes. She felt a little embarrassed and forced to smile. Scars are scars, what else could it be? It's ugly, right? Actually, the rumor that I'm ugly is not groundless, it's just that my face is still acceptable. Why didn't you treat your injuries properly? Rongyue Tianlan's voice was cold, angry that she did not know how to cherish her body. Ji Xinyue was stunned for a moment. I cherish my life very much, I did treat it properly. But sometimes the conditions don't allow it. When she was injured, she could only treat it herself. After all, the conditions were limited, and most of the time, she did not have time to treat her wounds properly. She could only bandage them briefly before going back into battle. By the time she had time and medicine, she had already missed the best treatment period, leaving behind scars of all sizes. As the saying goes, when there are too many lice, don't bite, when there are too many debts, don't worry. When there were more scars on her body, she did not care so much when she was injured again. Anyway, dozens of scars on her body were similar to 100 scars. They were all equally ugly. She was too lazy to torment herself when she was injured again. Now that her limbs were all exposed, Ji Xinyue saw the scales on her legs. Her calves were long. Although half of her thighs were covered by her pants, a large part was still exposed. Her gaze tightened, and she quickly looked away. People with trypophobia could not afford to be hurt. Rongyue Tianlan was silent for a moment. Why is a princess like you working so hard? Can't you just stay in the palace? Ji Xinyue's expression was indifferent. I can't stay in the palace, there's no longer me in the palace. She paused. There's no place for you. Rongyue Tianlan continued for her. Ji Xinyue lowered her eyes and did not speak again. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her for a moment, raised his hand and took out 2 green pills from nowhere, and put them near her lips. Eat them. Ji Xinyue knew that he would not harm her at this time, so she opened her mouth and swallowed the pills. A trace of coldness entered her throat and slid down her stomach. Rongyue Tianlan's palm pressed against her stomach. She was shocked and looked up at him, almost raising her hand to chop off his wolf claws. A girl's stomach was not for any man to touch. I'm just helping you circulate the medicinal energy. I don't have any other intentions. You said it yourself that your body is ugly. You still expect me to take advantage of you when you're so ugly. Even if you're willing, I'm not. Rongyue Tianlan's words were somewhat poisonous, causing Ji Xinyue to choke on her words. He looked like a straightforward doctor, so Ji Xinyue couldn't say anything else. His palms were warm, and a warm current flowed out from his palms. It flowed into a certain acupuncture point on her abdomen and circulated over and over again. Under the urging of his palm, the medicine gradually dissolved. Wisps of coolness flowed through her limbs and bones, gradually gathering at the wounds on her body, causing her wounds to heat up and swell. What are you doing? This was the first time Ji Xinyue had been treated like this, so she was very curious. To heal you. Rongyue Ishanlan's words were concise and comprehensive. Ji Xinyue heaved a sigh of relief. After chatting for so long, he finally began to treat her injuries. So this was his healing method. It was indeed unique. She was still worried. Is my power all right? Can it still be the same as before? Of course. Rongyue Tianlan reassured her. Chapter 2679. Of course. Rongyue Tianlan reassured her, then looked at her again. You really don't care about the scales on your body. Rongyue Tianlan was a perfectionist. He felt that if such scales grew on his body, he would even have thoughts of suicide. He would rather treat the scales first and then treat other injuries. Ji Xinyue paused. I care, but didn't you say it's quite difficult? I said it's difficult, but it doesn't mean there's no hope at all. Rongyue Tianlan was speechless. She was retreating too quickly. How difficult is it? Ji Xinyue was finally interested. You need me to treat you continuously for 318 days. It will also consume a lot of my spiritual medicine. Ji Xinyue was stunned for a moment, then blurted out, so long. I still want to recuperate and go to the marriage pillar with you the day after tomorrow to cancel the engagement. Then if I only recover my martial arts, will it take less time? Rongyue Tianlan was speechless. He said sinisterly, so you're in such a hurry. Don't worry, I'm also very anxious about this matter. But after all, I'm the one who wronged you first. Now that I'm treating you, just treat it as me returning the favor. Ji Xinyue felt that this Eighth Highness was indeed quite skilled in the field of medicine. 2 days ago, she was still lying on the bed listlessly, and when she got up, she would break out in a cold sweat. After this Eighth Highness treatment, she was actually able to jump around energetically in 2 days. And he was right, her martial arts had returned to her body with the recovery of her strength. If Rongyue Tianlan hadn't forbidden her to use her martial arts these few days, she almost wanted to do a round of boxing every morning as usual. Perhaps Rongyue Tianlan's words that day were effective, or perhaps the South Heaven Emperor finally realized that this daughter was actually quite useful. He actually had someone build a magnificent courtyard for her in 2 days. It was bigger and more comfortable than any other princess courtyard. What was even rarer was that this courtyard was built beside a clear stream. As long as she walked out of the palace gate, she would be able to see the stream winding around her courtyard. There was a curved ancient bridge above the stream, and there were lively fishes swimming in the stream. Every flower, every blade of grass, every rock, and every pavilion in the courtyard was so ingenious. When Ji Shinyu was able to come out for a stroll, she walked around the courtyard inside and out. She deeply felt that her imperial father was also a person with a broad mind. No matter how she looked at it, everything here was like a landscape painting. Glazed roof tiles, green jade walls, coral trees, and all kinds of flowers and plants adorned the interior. Amidst the magnificence, there was a spiritual energy that made one feel refreshed. Ji Shinyu was actually someone who couldn't sit still. When she could move around freely, she wanted to go out for a stroll. Rong Yuetian didn't restrict her. She only told her that she couldn't use her skills or leave the palace in these 5 days. The rest was up to her. There were many halls in the imperial palace, especially in the imperial harem. Pavilions, terraces, and towers were all connected to each other. The South Heaven Emperor was a playboy and had many concubines. Almost every palace had a concubine. Ji Shinyu hadn't returned for too long and hadn't stayed in the imperial palace for too long. She didn't recognize any of these concubines. Previously, when she occasionally met these concubines, they either pretended not to see her or greeted her in a strange manner. Their relationship with Ji Shinyu was very ordinary. But this time, they seemed to have taken the wrong medicine. Chapter 2680. But this time, it was as if they had taken the wrong medicine. When they saw her, they frequently expressed their goodwill. Not only did they often send people to her palace to deliver things, they also warmly invited her to their palace as a guest. Ji Shinyu didn't like these social gatherings. When she was strolling around the imperial palace, she ran into a few concubines. After experiencing their enthusiasm, she didn't want to wander around the imperial palace as she found it very boring. So after that, she only walked around her mother's place every day, paid her respects, and then went back. Because Rongyue Tianlan had to heal her every day, he also lived in the palace. Moreover, the place he lived was very close to her palace, only separated by a wall. Every time she went out, she had to pass by the entrance of his palace. Occasionally, she would take a look inside and often see him doing some miscellaneous things inside. It was really some miscellaneous things. For example, he cultivated a piece of land to plant flowers and plants. For example, he fanned himself in front of a red clay stove to carefully brew tea. For example, he casually cut a piece of purple bamboo to make a bamboo flute and leisurely test the sound. For example, he set up a table to play chess. Speaking of chess, Ji Shinyu heard an allusion. It said that His Highness the 8th Prince's chess skills were not bad. He once excitedly found a chess master in the palace to play a few rounds. In the end, the chess master lost so badly that his pants almost fell off. In terms of chess skills, His Highness the 8th Prince was lonely because he could not find an opponent. In the end, he played with himself, and found himself enjoying himself. After watching a few times, Ji Shinyu deeply felt that His Highness the 8th Prince was really not the same kind of person as her. His Highness the 8th Prince was a truly refined and cultured noble young master. He was a master in the 4 arts, planting flowers and brewing tea. He was a master in all of them. Wherever he sat, it would be an ink painting of mountains and rivers. Wherever he went, countless maids and concubines would stare at him with their eyes wide open. Their hearts would thump and ripple. Over the past few days, there would be maids and concubines passing by his palace from time to time for various reasons. Every time they pretended to pass by, they would sincerely look inside. If they saw him, they would blush. If they didn't see him, they would be disappointed. Ji Shinyu was even a little worried that those concubines would not be able to control themselves and go in to seduce His Highness the 8th Prince, making her father a cuckold. Honestly, she didn't care if her father was a cuckold or not. What she was worried about was if her imperial father found out about these things, would he go on a killing spree and kill her amorous stepmothers in a fit of rage? Fortunately, Rollercoasters Tianlon probably knew that he shouldn't touch the grass near his nest, so he acted as if he didn't see those concubines' expressions of goodwill. He completely ignored them, allowing Ji Xinyue to heave a sigh of relief. Compared to Rollercoasters Tianlon's excellence in all aspects, Ji Xinyue deeply felt that she was scum. Other than wielding swords and sticks, she didn't seem to know anything else. She didn't know anything about zither, chess, calligraphy, or painting, and her needlework was a complete mess. Although it was barely enough to grill a fish, it was barely edible. It couldn't be considered delicious. If it wasn't for that marriage contract, the two of them wouldn't be together at all. Therefore, annulling the engagement was the right thing to do. It was for the good of both of them. However, probably because Rollercoasters Tianlon had been soaking in her courtyard for the past few days to treat her injuries, there were some faint rumors spreading in the palace. Of course, this gossip was secretly spread. If it wasn't for Ji Xinyue's sharp ears as a martial arts practitioner, she wouldn't have known that this gossip could be so groundless. Chapter 2681. Of course, this gossip was secretly spread. If it wasn't for the fact that Ji Xinyue was a martial artist with sharp ears and accidentally overheard a few times, she really wouldn't have known that gossip could be so groundless and made up so well. Ji Xinyue was very impressed with the level of the person who made up the gossip, and could directly write an opera book. The gossip went like this. At that time, Ji Xinyue was strolling in the back garden and saw a butterfly flying very long and handsome, so she wanted to catch it and play with it. Unexpectedly, the butterfly was very slippery, and actually flew up and down like a wheel of fire. She couldn't use her martial arts, so after a few tries, she still couldn't catch it. This aroused her competitive nature, and she followed the butterfly all the way to the outskirts of a small courtyard. With a beautiful grab, she finally caught the butterfly. Just as he was about to walk back in triumphantly, he heard a conversation coming from Xiao Xie's closed window. Do you think the third princess is pretending to be sick? It should be. She must be pretending to be sick to gain the sympathy of the eighth prince. This woman is very scheming. I thought so too. I heard that His Highness the eighth prince originally came to break off the engagement, but in the end, this woman deliberately fainted in front of him. His Highness the eighth prince is incomparably benevolent and righteous. He couldn't bear to see a girl fainting in front of so many people, so he brought her back. I don't know what this woman did, but she actually made His Highness the eighth prince stand up for her. She made His Majesty build the best palace for her overnight. I heard that the things inside are the best and the most expensive. Any random chair is worth a lot of money. Do you guys think that His Highness the eighth prince was charmed by her seductive methods? These days, he spent most of his time in her courtyard. Someone sneered. What nonsense are you guessing? What kind of person is the eighth prince? How could he be charmed by her? I heard that before he left, countless women were infatuated with him. Some of the bolder ones even went to him to recommend themselves as his pillow, but he casually threw them out. How could such a person be charmed by the third princess? If he was really infatuated with her, he wouldn't have come to cancel the engagement. But some people say that the eighth prince doesn't mention canceling the engagement anymore, as if he regretted it. He often goes in and out with the third princess. They won't really become a couple again, right? Absolutely not. The eighth prince is just purely treating her illness. The only reason I'm being nice to her now is because I feel guilty. When Ji Xinyue heard this, she deeply agreed. She felt that the little palace maid who spoke at the end was rather wise and far-sighted, revealing the true meaning behind His Highness the eighth prince's rescue. Although the contents of these conversations were quite insulting to Ji Xinyue, it was a good thing that Ji Xinyue was already used to hearing these kinds of insults. She didn't take it to heart at all, automatically filtering it out. Just as she was about to leave with the butterfly's wings in her hand, the words that followed caused her to stop in her tracks. You've all guessed wrong. In fact, His Highness the 8th Prince has been staying in the palace not for the 3rd princess. The 3rd princess is just an excuse for him to stay. He's actually staying for another person. Who? Who is the 8th prince doing this for? Hurry up and tell me, don't keep me in suspense. He did it for the 2nd princess. Ji Xinyu's fingers tightened, and one of the butterfly's wings was pulled off by her 2nd princess. How could this be? The 2nd princess is already married. Someone questioned in surprise. Chapter 2682. So what if she's married? They can't stop each other from loving each other. The voice of the little maid who threw down this gossip was full of vicissitudes. You probably don't know, but 3,000 years ago, His Highness the 8th Prince and the 2nd Princess were childhood sweethearts, a true pair. Unfortunately, the heavens played tricks on people, and the 3rd princess was born. Not only was she born, but there were also a few phoenixes flying around, so everyone thought that the 3rd princess must be extraordinary. Only then did the East Sky Emperor send someone to propose marriage to the 3rd princess, allowing her to pick up a loophole. His Highness the 8th Prince and the 2nd princess were childhood sweethearts. This is the first time I've heard of this. Tell us in detail. The other maids in Xiao Xie's group all became gossipy. Ji Xinyu also had a rare curiosity, so she also calmed down and listened. The little maid who spread the gossip did not disappoint, and vividly described, 3,000 years ago, our 2nd princess was still a young maiden. She went out to participate in a garden party, and accidentally fell into a lake. At that time, His Highness the 8th Prince spared no effort to save her. Our princess was very beautiful, and His Highness the 8th Prince fell in love with her at first sight. He went out to swim with her, and when they parted, he told our 2nd princess that he would send someone to propose marriage to her in the future. Our 2nd princess also fell in love with him at first sight, and had been waiting for his people to come. Who would have thought that when the Eastern Sky Clan finally sent someone to propose marriage, the one he was asking for was the 3rd princess? Our 2nd princess was heartbroken, and hated him for being heartless, so in a fit of anger, she married the Northern Sky Clan and became a princess. There was actually such a story. Ji Xinyu felt that it was a bit hard to believe, because the content was too similar to those melodramatic stories. She had read a lot of stories these years, and among them, there were quite a few that were similar to this. Ji Xinyu had already heard that the little maid who spread the gossip was the 2nd princess, Ji Shenmeng's, and was quite loyal to the 2nd princess. She had followed the 2nd princess since she was young, so she did know some things about the 2nd princess. Could it be that what she said was true? Not only did this marriage make her, Ji Xinyu, miserable, but it also unintentionally made her a big stick to break up a pair of mandarin ducks. The maid continued, later on, His Highness the 8th Prince made a special trip to the Eastern Sky Clan to look for the 2nd princess. He told her that he didn't expect things to turn out like this and that the person proposing marriage must have made a mistake. He told the 2nd princess to wait for him and that he would give the 2nd princess an explanation. However, at that time, the 2nd princess had already married our 2nd prince consort. What was done could not be undone, and the 2nd princess had no other choice. His Highness the 8th Prince left. I heard that he drank all night and cried all night. The next day, he left for another place and never came back. This little maid spoke so vividly that Ji Xinyu felt goosebumps all over her body when she heard it. She could barely imagine Rong Yu Tianlan drinking alone, but crying for an entire night. The image of Rong Yu Tianlan hugging a wine gourd and crying her eyes out seemed to flash before Ji Xinyu's eyes. That scene was so beautiful that she couldn't even imagine it. That guy looks so happy every day. Does he even have tear ducts? She began to deeply doubt the veracity of the little handmaiden's words and how much of a discount she needed. Naturally, there were also people who questioned, that can't be right. I heard that His Highness the 8th Prince left the Fanine continent before he was engaged to the 3rd princess. Why would he look for the 2nd princess after the engagement? I heard that the 2nd princess got married 2 years after the 3rd princess and His Highness the 8th Prince were engaged. The timing obviously didn't match. Chapter 2683. The little maid who was spreading the gossip said disdainfully, "What you heard is only the official story. Actually, what I said is the truth. To tell you the truth, this time His Highness the 8th Prince stayed in the palace and met the 2nd princess several times." She then lowered her voice. "Actually, His Highness the 8th Prince secretly visited our 2nd princess several times. He stayed in the palace completely for our 2nd princess, but he couldn't say it out loud." Sigh, two pitiful lovers, torn apart just like that. The little maid's long sigh was filled with emotions about the tragedy of love. Ji Xinhua shuddered. She realized that her imagination was not bad. In her mind, she actually imagined the sad scene of the 2nd princess and Rongyue Tianlan meeting in secret. Thus, she shuddered again. Somehow, she felt that the scene was not quite right. This time, the 2nd princess stayed in her mother's house for a long time and did not leave. However, she heard from the Empress that the 2nd princess had already bid farewell to her, but after hearing that Rongyue Tianlan had arrived, she did not leave. These few days, the 2nd princess had indeed been wandering around the palace. She even passed by Rongyue Tianlan's courtyard 2 or 3 times. Once, she even fell into Ji Xinyue's eyes, but Ji Xinyue did not see any sparks between them. Could it be that they had already collided, but both of them were good at acting to cover it up? Ji Xinyue was thinking while pinching the butterfly's wings when she was awakened by a cheerful call, "Third sister." The voice was crisp like a tender cucumber with flowers and leaves. Ji Xinyue looked up and saw Ji Tianyue falling from the sky like a pink butterfly. The noise was not small, and it also startled a few little maids who were gossiping in the small pavilion. The window opened and a few pale little faces peeked out. When they saw Ji Xinyue, their little faces became even paler. "Sister, what are you doing here? Have your injuries healed?" Ji Tianyue's big watery eyes were full of concern. "I saw a butterfly, so I chased it here and caught it." "Tianyue, do you think this butterfly is pretty?" Ji Xinyue picked up the butterfly and showed it to Ji Tianyue. Seeing the butterfly, Ji Tianyue cried, "Sister, why is it missing one of its wings?" Ji Xinyue blushed with shame. "That. I accidentally caught it just now. Does that mean it won't survive?" Ji Tianyue held the butterfly in her hands. The butterfly was fluttering in her palms. Without a wing, it could no longer fly. What awaited it was indeed death. Ji Tianyue was a little girl who would shed tears at the sight of a withered flower. Seeing butterfly in such a state, her tears flowed down like raindrops from a pear blossom. Ji Xinyu originally did not take this butterfly to heart, but now that she saw her sister crying like this, she suddenly felt that she had committed a grave sin. She coughed and said, it's fine. I'll help it grow its wings back." She scanned her surroundings and finally found the wing that had fallen off. She then used a small spell technique, and sure enough, the wing grew back on the butterfly's body. Ji Tianyu was immediately overjoyed, her eyes curved in joy as she hugged Ji Xinyu's arm. "Big sister, you're the best." Ji Xinyue's pretty face was slightly pale, and she felt a turbid qi floating in her body. It seemed like Rong Yuetian was right. She couldn't use any spells now. She only used such a small spell and her body started to feel strange again. Chapter 2684. She patted Ji Tianyu's shoulder. "All right, Its wings have just grown back. It's still a bit injured. I'll bring it back to rest for a while and feed it some spirit water. It should be fine. Ji Tianyut happily ran off with the butterfly in her hands. At this moment, the few gossipy maids also came out of the small pavilion and greeted Ji Shinyu. Ji Shinyu glanced at them and smiled. So it was you guys talking here. The maids didn't know how much she had heard and were nervous, only replying vaguely, we were just gossiping, we made a fool of ourselves. Ji Shinyu leisurely said, there's nothing to laugh at. I vaguely heard you guys say that my second sister is cheating on me. The maidservants' faces turned pale. Especially the second princess maid, her face was even paler. No, the princess must have heard wrongly. Ji Shinyu took out a talisman from her sleeve and said lightly, this princess heard wrongly. Then this princess talisman shouldn't have recorded wrongly, right? You probably don't know this, but this is a recording talisman. It has already recorded every word you said. Since you think this princess heard wrongly, then this princess will let His Majesty hear it. It's better to let His Majesty verify it with you. All the maids kneeled on the ground, trembling like quails in the wind and rain, desperately kowtowing, begging Ji Shinyu to be merciful. Seeing her indifference, the maids who were talking excitedly just now began to slap themselves in the face to beg for forgiveness. Ji Shinyu stood there with her arms crossed, watching them slap their faces until they looked like purple eggplants. Only then did she slowly open her mouth. I'll let you guys off this time. The next time this princess hears any rumors in the palace, this princess will put all the credit on your heads. I'll definitely report it to father and let him deal with it. The maids nodded like they were pounding garlic, repeatedly agreeing. Gossiping about the princesses, regardless of whether it was true or false, once the evidence was conclusive, all of them would be sentenced to death. That's why they were so scared. Seeing that Ji Shinyu's tone was softening, they naturally accepted the order and thanked her. However, there was someone who was a little slow to react and couldn't help but say, Third Princess, we naturally won't discuss this anymore, but if other people in the palace talk about it and spread it, Ji Shinyu gave her a rather benevolent smile, that's your problem. If this princess hears any more gossip, this princess will make an example out of you. After saying this, she turned around and left. She believed that in the next few days, her ears would be much quieter. Gossips like to gather together. These maids should be the most outstanding ones among these gossips. As long as they were restrained, for the sake of their own lives, they would try their best to prevent others from spreading the rumors. Ji Shinyu wasn't someone who was afraid of gossip. As someone who had been in the center of gossip and entertainment, she was already immune to such rumors. She was just a little curious. As the saying goes, there is no smoke without fire. Could it be that her second sister and Rongyue Tianlan did have a little relationship back then? Also, saying that she pretended to be sick to gain Rongyue Tianlan's sympathy to achieve the goal of not breaking off the engagement was too infuriating. God knows how much she wanted to break off this unlucky engagement that had pushed her into a whirlpool. She was now able to move normally, perhaps she wouldn't need to wait 18 days for her injuries to completely heal. Chapter 2685. This Eighth Highness should also want to break off the engagement, otherwise, he wouldn't be treating her so wholeheartedly and giving her so many spirit herbs to eat every day. Ji Shinyu recognized many of the spirit herbs, they were all extremely rare in this continent. Some of them were even things that could only be found by chance, but now, she was eating so many of them like they were beans. Ji Shinyu's heart ached for these spirit herbs for Rongyue Tianlan. At the same time, she admired him. In order to break off this engagement, he really put in a lot of effort. Coming out of the back garden, Ji Shinyu walked around the Empress Palace, wanting to pay her respects and go back after saying a few words. She happened to meet the South Sky Emperor there. These days, the South Sky Emperor came to the Empress Palace very frequently. Originally, He didn't visit for a few months, but these days, he came to the Empress Palace almost every day to report. He started to dote on his wife again. The estrangement of thousands of years couldn't be eliminated in a few days. Every time Ji Shinyu saw her father, she felt speechless and often there was an awkward silence. This time was the same. After saying a few words, she got up and left. But this time, the South Sky Emperor seemed to have taken the wrong medicine. He directly held her hand and said that he wanted to have a good chat with her. His face was full of love and his words were gentle, like a loving father. But Ji Shinyu was used to being cold to him. Now that he suddenly acted like this, she was not used to it. The South Sky Emperor's palm was well maintained. There was not a single callus on his palm, it was warm and soft. When Ji Shinyu was young, she was often held by this hand. But she didn't know when, but this hand never came close to her. At that time, she was also not used to it. When she was young, she would always try to throw herself into his arms and let him hold her. However, he would always glare at her with disgust and freeze her in place, not daring to move forward. When she was young, she always thought that she wasn't outstanding enough. She always thought that she wasn't good enough, so she tried her best to please him. When he asked her to enter the Purple Cloud sect, she entered the Purple Cloud sect. She studied and cultivated with all her might just to show her father that she was actually quite outstanding. She wouldn't embarrass him, but later on, she realized that it wasn't that she wasn't good enough, but that the person who doted on her didn't like her anymore. So no matter what she did, she would always be wrong and be reprimanded by him. After being disappointed for too long, she no longer cared about what she had always wanted. But occasionally, when she saw her father dote on her little sister, she would think of those memories that she had almost forgotten. Now that her father held her hand, she had almost forgotten the temperature of her father's palm. Although her father's, she still, and you, it. The South Heaven Emperor kindly asked her a lot of questions, such as her injuries, and whether she had enough maids by her side. In the end, he talked about the difficulties of governing the Nantion clan. Among the 4 heavenly clans, the Nantion clan was relatively weaker. They could only stand on equal footing with the other heavenly clans through marriage. For example, when Ji Shinmeng was married to the Baitian clan, although she was married to a prince who was not very favored, she was still considered in-laws with the Baitian clan. That was why the Baitian clan gave the Nantion clan some convenience in dealing with the surrounding affairs. Ru, Tian Tian Ru Ru Ru. To the Ru, he, are you Rong Ru Rus. Chapter 2686. He also praised Rong Yu Tianlan's character and appearance, saying that this son-in-law was a good husband that couldn't be found even with a lantern. Then, he asked about her and Rong Yu Tianlan's interactions over the past few days. He asked her hopefully, "Father, he seems to be treating you well, so he probably doesn't want to break off the engagement. You have to seize this opportunity." Ji Shinyu's heart suddenly felt cold. So her father was suddenly so good to her because of Rong Yu Tianlan. He still had great hope for this marriage. She slowly pulled her hand out, looked at her father, and said seriously, "Father, he is only good to me because he feels guilty, there is no other reason. I have already agreed with him that when my injuries are completely healed, I will go to the marriage pillar to break off the engagement." Looking at the South Heaven Emperor's pale face, she bitterly smiled and asked, "Father, if this marriage didn't happen, you wouldn't recognize me as your daughter, right? Is it because of him that you care about me?" The South Sky Emperor was stunned. He looked at his daughter and subconsciously retorted, "No, Shinyu, don't misunderstand. In my heart, you are always my good daughter, but this marriage, Imperial Father, this marriage is impossible. You don't have to have any more hope. If Royal Father treats Shinyu well because of this, then royal father can continue to treat Shinyu coldly, since Shinyu is already used to it. If royal father doesn't like Shinyu because of this, then Shinyu will naturally leave, so that royal father won't have to worry about Shinyu. Shinyu turned and left. The South Sky Emperor's face changed and he grabbed her. Shinyu, is this how you see your father? Shinyu broke free from his hand and forced a smile. Father, I am a little tired. I will take my leave first. She bowed to the South Sky Emperor and turned to leave. The South Sky Emperor was stunned. He never thought that his daughter would look at him like this. It turned out that he had always given his daughter this feeling. When Shinyu returned to her courtyard, it was already sunset. The afterglow of the setting sun gilded everything in the courtyard. Strange flowers and plants, fake mountains and paintings, they were all bathed in the afterglow of the setting sun. Shinyu looked at the scenery in the courtyard in a daze. Rongyue Tianlan brought out a table from nowhere. On the table was the 4 treasures of the study. On the table was a large piece of rice paper. He stood in front of the table and was drawing. Beside him stood a little girl. Her pink dress was as tender as a spring flower under the setting sun. Her little face was also as tender as a spring flower. She was focused on Rongyue Tianlan painting. The little girl was none other than Shinyu, her little sister. The afterglow of the setting sun outlined their faint silhouettes, which looked very harmonious. Seeming to have heard the commotion, Tianyue raised her head and saw Shinyu standing at the door. Her eyes lit up and she ran over. Third sister. The little girl was unusually enthusiastic and directly threw herself into her arms. Shinyu helped her up and rubbed her head. Tianyu, why are you here? Tianyu's big eyes curved into crescent moons. Third sister, after I brought the butterfly back, it has been listless. I fed its spirit water, but it didn't work. I was afraid that it would die, so I brought it to find you. I found that you weren't here, but Brother Rongyue was here. Brother Rongyue is very capable. He only blew a breath of air, and the butterfly was alive and kicking again. He really is capable, right? Oh. Chapter 2687. She looked at Rongyue Tianlan with eyes full of admiration. Shinyu looked at her, then looked at Rongyue Tianlan, and finally understood what was going on. However, she was still a little puzzled, so she asked, brother, why are you in my courtyard at this time? Although Rongyue Tianlan could usually stay in her courtyard for half a day, it was only to treat her injuries. Once the treatment was done, he would leave immediately and return to his own courtyard. The treatment would usually be done in the morning. According to Rongyue Tianlan, the morning was the best time for all things to grow, and healing in the morning was the fastest. In the afternoon, they would do their own things, and no one would interfere with each other. Therefore, Shinyu was a little surprised to see him in her courtyard at this time, especially when she saw him take out her desk and use her 4 treasures of the study. Rongyue Tianlan finished the last stroke, but he did not answer Shinyu's question. Instead, he beckoned to Tianyue, come here, take a look at the painting. Tianyue ran over, and after looking around for a while, she exclaimed, Brother Rongyue, your painting is so beautiful. It's even better than father's personal painter. She carefully picked up the painting and showed it to Shinyu as if she was presenting a treasure. Third sister, look, isn't the painting good? Look at the sunset, the clouds, the continuous palace, the density is appropriate, the distance is good. A bunch of professional comments came out of her little mouth, which made Shinyu look at her in a new light. She had long heard that her younger sister was good at music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, but she did not know much about it. Now it seemed that the rumors were true, at least she was good at judging paintings. Shinyu also looked at the painting. Although she had never learned how to paint, she had wandered around the Jianghu for so many years, so she was still very knowledgeable and knew a little about painting. However, it was just a superficial knowledge. Rongyue Tianlan's painting looked majestic, and it was indeed a good painting, especially the line of words on the painting, which was written in a flamboyant and elegant style, which matched his temperament very well. Third sister, brother Rongyu said he would give this painting to me. Ji Tianyue's big eyes sparkled as she held the painting like it was a treasure. She was short, so when she grabbed the top of the painting with both hands, the bottom almost dragged on the ground. She had to tiptoe to do so. Ji Xinyue glanced at Rongyue Tianlan again. He was standing there with his arms crossed, looking at her and her sister with a smile. To be more precise, he was looking at Ji Tianyue with a gentle gaze. It seemed like he got along well with little Tianyu. So he liked children. Ji Tianyue stuffed the painting into Ji Xinyue's hands. Big sister, hold it for me first. I want to dance for big brother Rongyu, I promised him. Ji Xinyue, Ji Tianyue was very talented in dancing. Her pink dress fluttered in the wind, and every move she made was filled with spiritual energy. There was a rumor in the Fanine continent that Princess Ji Tianyue's dance was the dance of a celestial being. This was also the main reason why the South Heaven Emperor doted on her. When the South Heaven clan had distinguished guests, they would usually let Ji Tianyue perform a solo dance to win the guests' praise. She had not yet reached marriageable age, but there were already many young masters and princes who came to ask for her hand in marriage. The South Heaven Emperor wanted to choose the best for his younger daughter. In addition, his daughter was still young, so he had not found a suitable one after picking from those who came to ask for her hand in marriage. Chapter 2688. Although Ji Xinyue did not have many opportunities to return to the palace, she was lucky enough to see her once 100 years ago. She was already dancing very well then, and now she was even better looking at her. Rongyue Tianlan casually took out a flute and played it for her. The flute's sound was beautiful and ethereal. Her dance was light and graceful like a fairy. Ji Xinyue looked at this and then looked at that, and suddenly felt that she was a little redundant. She casually placed the painting on the table, then turned and walked out. Ji Tianyue was very focused on dancing, and Rongyue Tianlan was also very focused, so no one noticed that Ji Xinyue had left. The setting sun had completely rolled down the mountain, and dusk gradually rose, slowly enveloping the entire world. The lamps in front of the shops on the street lit up one after another, so the street did not seem dark. The people of Fire Phoenix City lived and worked in peace, and the night market was also very lively. Ji Xinyue mixed in with the crowd, strolled around the shops, looked at the colored lanterns, and guessed the riddles. She was quite happy with herself, and the irritation in her heart lessened a lot. Perhaps it was because of the gossip she had heard today, or perhaps it was because of the conversation she had with her imperial father, or perhaps it was because Rongyu Tianlan had occupied her courtyard without informing her first. Her nerves had been trained over the years, and if it was just one of these things, she would not take it to heart. However, all of these things happened at the same time, which made her want to take a stroll to relieve her boredom. She was a little annoyed dealing with the people and things in the palace, so she naturally did not want to walk around the palace and annoy herself even more, so she walked out. Of course, for convenience, she changed into a man's body. According to Rongyue Tianlan, she could not use spells these few days, but she had already used it once in the afternoon when she was restoring the butterfly wings for her sister. At that time, she felt a little uncomfortable, but not long after, she returned to normal. Since it was not a big deal after using it once, it should not be a big deal if she used it a second time, right? Anyway, this transformation technique did not consume much spiritual power, and was even easier than restoring the butterfly wings. Therefore, after she left the palace, she changed her appearance and became an elegant young master. Today was the full moon festival, and there were many people on the streets. Families with children came out to stroll around the streets. Perhaps it was because the moonlight was too beautiful that Ji Xinyu, who had always prided herself on being simple-minded, was a little sentimental tonight. Especially when she saw her family traveling together, she felt even more upset. This was originally a very ordinary happiness, but Ji Xinyu had never tasted this kind of happiness before. Perhaps she had tasted it when she was young, but it had been so long ago that she had almost forgotten what it was like to travel with her parents. She wandered the streets until the sky turned dark and her stomach growled. Only then did she remember that she hadn't eaten anything. She casually walked into a restaurant on the side of the road. There were many people in the restaurant. She searched for a long time before she found a table in a secluded corner. She ordered a few dishes and a pot of wine and slowly ate. Restaurants had always been places where gossip spread. Now that Ji Xinyu had heard some gossip, she realized that she had once again become the main character of the gossip. However, the gossip about her this time was good. Most of it was praising her. The third princess was really as beautiful as a flower. The third princess's divine skills were unparalleled. The third princess's filial piety was bursting. His Highness Rongyu the eighth prince regretted breaking off this engagement and was now living in the palace, trying his best to win her back. Chapter 2689. Especially the story of the third princess teaching Chang Bubaya a lesson at the banquet. Some people seemed to have seen it with their own eyes as they talked about it like a storyteller, their saliva flying everywhere as they gestured with their chopsticks from time to time. Ji Xinyu's ears were filled with this gossip. After being scolded for nearly 3,000 years, she had long gotten used to it. Now that she suddenly heard these praises, she actually felt a little happy. If she had known earlier, perhaps she would have exposed her martial arts and appearance earlier. But if she had been exposed early on, her father would have imprisoned her in the palace and then brought her to attend all kinds of events. He would have thought of ways to let her get to know more nobles so that he could find a few potential husbands for her. How could she have been free for more than 2,000 years? In fact, her bad reputation over the years was not necessarily a bad thing for her. At least she did not have to go back to the palace to see her father's cold face. The little girl at the next table suddenly cried. Ji Xinyu turned her head and saw a family of 4 sitting at the next table. The couple and their 2 daughters. This family was probably not rich, so they only ordered 2 or 3 dishes, all of which were children's favorites. The younger one was more domineering. She pulled all the dishes in front of her and blocked them with one arm, not letting the older child eat. The older sister was also a child, so she naturally did not want to. While the younger sister was not paying attention, she quickly pulled a plate and put it in front of her. Before she could even move her chopsticks, the younger sister cried out. Her crying face was like a pear blossom in the rain, feeling extremely wronged. The parents felt sorry for the younger daughter and without any explanation, they let the older daughter give the dishes to the younger sister. The older daughter also felt wronged. She held the plate in her small hands and did not want to return it. Father, mother, sister already has 2 plates. I only have 1, I'm hungry, the mother persuaded, don't make your sister cry. She can't finish 3 plates. You can eat when she has leftovers. Quickly give it to sister. The older daughter's eyes reddened. Why should I always have leftovers? It's like this at home, it's like this outside. She simply wrapped her arms around the plate and refused to return it. The father was impatient. Why are you so immature? He took a pair of chopsticks and hit his daughter's arm hard twice. The child's arm was very tender, so it immediately swelled up. The older daughter also cried, You're biased. Too biased. Why do you give everything to sister? I am also your daughter. The mother frowned. Jing, are you jealous of your sister? Aren't you being too insensible? Yes, I'm jealous of her. You give her everything. You're not giving me anything. Wah. The little girl finally exploded and ran out crying. The couple looked at each other. The mother wanted to chase after her, but the father was still angry. The older she gets, the more immature she becomes. Let her go, don't bother with her. The younger daughter also pulled her mother's sleeve and said, Mother, peel prawns for Mang Mang. Mang Mang wants to eat big prawns. The mother had no choice but to sit down again, and the family of 4 became 3, and started eating again. The eldest daughter was actually only 100 years old, which was equivalent to a 6 or 7-year-old child in the human world. With such a child running out on her own, the parents were not worried at all. Ji Xinyu inadvertently saw this scene and felt a little suffocated in her heart. She rubbed her eyebrows and suddenly lost her appetite as she looked at the table full of dishes. Back then, she had actually been secretly jealous of her younger sister. She was jealous that she could easily gain the love of her parents. She was jealous that she could live a carefree life. She was jealous that she didn't have to bear so many curses. Chapter 2690. Rather than saying that she was jealous, it was more like she was envious. She wished that she could be like her, and even fantasized that she could be as innocent as her, be loved by her parents like her, and be able to sing and dance like her. This desire became her inner demon, and because of it, she went mad once and was in a coma for many years, almost losing her life. Of course, after waking up, she thought it through. She was her, not anyone else, and she didn't need to be anyone else. She thought that she was no longer envious of her sister, but after seeing how Rongyue Tianlan and her sister got along, she felt a little envious. She envied her sister for being able to easily get the care and love of others. Her parents were like that, and even her fiancé was like that. Naive and innocent children could always arouse people's pity and love, right? Unfortunately, she couldn't be innocent anymore, nor could she be innocent. Although she looked like a young woman, her heart was full of vicissitudes. She rubbed her eyebrows, feeling that her heart was a little hot tonight, and unknowingly, she drank a few more glasses of wine. The weather was cold, and not many people would sit by the window, so even if Ji Xinyu came late, she could still sit by the window, drinking while casually admiring the scenery outside. Suddenly, her eyes focused and fell on 2 people in the crowd. An adult and a child, a man and a woman. The man was handsome, and the girl was innocent with a hint of childishness. It was Rongyue Tianlan and Ji Tianyue. Although the 2 of them had changed into casual clothes, their appearances were outstanding, and attracted the attention of countless people walking on the street. Rongyue Tianlan had long been used to such gazes, and walked as if nothing happened. After all, Ji Tianyue didn't come out often, and suddenly became the focus of everyone. She was still a little nervous. She couldn't help but hide behind Rongyue Tianlan, sticking close to him. She held an exquisite sugar figurine in one hand, and the other hand held onto Rongyue Tianlan's sleeve, like a little bird, afraid that he would throw her on the street. Brother Rongyue, why are they looking at us? Ji Tianyue asked softly. That's because they see that Tianyue is beautiful. Don't worry, they don't have any bad intentions. You don't have to be so nervous. Rongyue Tianlan comforted her gently. Ji Tianyue was still a little nervous. Brother Rongyue, you won't throw me on the street, right? I'm scared. No, I won't leave you behind. Rongyu Ishinlan raised her hand and rubbed her hair. Ji Tianyue was finally relieved. She was still a child after all, and she had someone she trusted by her side. She quickly forgot her nervousness and jumped around Rongyue Tianlan. Because of the South Heaven Emperor's strict control, she rarely came out. Everything she saw was new. She pulled Rongyu Ishinlan to look at this and that. Occasionally, when she saw something new, she would stop and buy a few. Rongyue Tianlan stayed by her side. He was such a person, yet he didn't find it annoying to stay by such a girl's side. It was as if he would grant Ji Tianyue's every request. Not only did he buy a lot of things for her, he even helped her carry them. Of course, he didn't carry it with his hand. Instead, he put it into his storage pouch. Ji Xinyu watched from above and saw him put a bag of fried beans, a few boxes of rouge powder, a few small hairpins, bracelets. They were all bought by Ji Tianyue. The little girl was overjoyed. Someone was willing to pay for her and even carry her bags for her. Naturally, she bought a lot of things, useful and useless. She collected a lot of things. Chapter 2691. Rongyu Tianlan followed beside her with a smile on his face and a doting expression on his face. Occasionally, his gaze would wander around the street as if he was looking for something. Ji Xinyue guessed that he was probably looking for something suitable for Ji Tianyue to buy to make the little girl happier. Originally, Ji Xinyue wanted to bring her sister out to play, but every time she went back, the South Heaven Emperor would guard against her as if she was a thief. He was afraid that she would lead a good sister astray, so he didn't let her have much contact with her sister, let alone bring her out. This Rongyu Tianlan was quite capable. After staying in the palace for a few days, he had gained her father's trust and was willing to let him bring his precious daughter out. The two of them quickly merged into the crowd and their figures gradually disappeared. Ji Xinyue retracted her gaze and lowered her head to drink a few more cups of wine. Perhaps it was because of her injury, her alcohol tolerance was a little low. After just one pot of wine, she felt a little dizzy. Looking out of the window, the moon was already high in the sky, silver light everywhere. A few strands of white clouds like fine sand twined around the moon, giving it a different kind of charm. Such a beautiful scene, yet she was actually in a restaurant feeling sad about spring and autumn. It was too boring. This full moon festival was a festival for the commoners, the palace didn't care about it. In the past, Ji Xinyue would often call her friends and find a place to admire the moon. Everyone would sit and talk, or they would hunt some monsters that only appeared on the night of the full moon. This year, she was injured, so it was impossible to hunt monsters, but finding a quiet place to admire the moon was a good idea. She poured another gourd of wine and left the restaurant, heading towards the west of the city. There was a Dufing mountain in the west of the city, and there was a moon-admiring peak in the mountain, which was taller than the surrounding mountains. Because the peak was extremely tall and straight, and there was a barrier on the peak, ordinary people couldn't go up at all, so that place became a place for experts to admire the moon. The full moon festival was just an unknown festival. On this day, ordinary people wandered around the city, admiring the lanterns, eating and drinking. And other immortal experts wouldn't specially come here to admire the moon. So there shouldn't be many people on moon-admiring peak today. Ji Xinyu only wanted to find a quiet place to drink a little wine, which was why she came here. She didn't expect to meet an acquaintance at the foot of the mountain. Rongyue Tianheng. Rongyue Tianheng's dressing tonight was a bit flashy. He wore a snow-white brocade robe and a black jade belt on his waist that sparkled under the moonlight. He wasn't alone. In his arms, there was a young girl in light green clothes. When Ji Xinyu saw them, Rongyu Tianheng was coaxing the young girl to climb up the mountain. The young girl was probably afraid of heights, her legs and stomach kept trembling. "Hero, I'm afraid of heights, this place looks dangerous, let's not go up. Let's climb that mountain." She pointed at a small hill not far away. The hill was like a grave. It was not high and the slope was gentle. That mountain peak is also not bad. There are flowers on it. The moon is so high up, isn't it beautiful? Don't you think so? Hero Rongyue Tianheng was obviously not happy. Xiao Nan, Only by climbing to the highest peak and admiring the moon can you appreciate the beauty of looking down at the mountains. Don't worry, I'll protect you from the side. I won't let you fall. But I'm still afraid. Don't be afraid. With this young master here, I will definitely not leave out a single strand of your hair. Rongyue Tianheng coaxed her and pulled her up the mountain. Oh. Chapter 2692. Ji Xinyu watched from below and couldn't help but laugh. It seemed that Rongyue Tianheng had found a confidant, but this confidant was a bit timid. But this would make him look more manly, right? She didn't want to disturb them, so she simply crossed her arms and watched. After climbing 3 to 4 feet, the woman's legs were already shaking like a pipe. She hugged Rongyue Tianheng's arm tightly. Hero, let's not climb, I'm scared. She was shaking so hard that her hand unknowingly went into Rongyue Tianheng's armpit. Rongyue Tianheng's itchy flesh was especially developed. Hey, don't hug me here. Ha, no, don't hug me here. He was laughing so hard that there was nothing under his feet, and the two of them fell directly from above. Ah, the woman's scream could tear apart the floating clouds in the sky. Fortunately, Rongyue Tianheng was very manly. Seeing that the situation was not good, he turned his body and turned to the bottom. When he landed, he became the woman's cushion. The woman almost fainted from fright. She was lying on Rongyue Tianheng's body in a daze, unable to regain her senses. Rongyue Tianheng was a thick-skinned person. After being hit by the woman, he only groaned. He panted on the ground and said, "You're so heavy. Get up, get up." The woman finally scrambled to get up. But the woman was so scared that her legs went soft. Just as she stood up, her body swayed and she screamed and fell towards Rongyue Tianheng again. Thus, Rongyue Tianheng, who had just sat up, was smashed back down again. Damn it, Rongyue Tianheng's face was full of black lines. He cursed and sat up with the woman in his arms. You. Aren't you always brave? So you were lying to me. I didn't scare you. I'm usually brave enough to catch snakes and mice with my bare hands, but that doesn't include climbing such a steep mountain. The woman's voice was full of grievance. I used to climb the small mountain over there to admire the moon. We can go there. Forget it, I'm not going anywhere. My interest in admiring the moon has been ruined by you. You women are so troublesome. Rongyue Tianheng had a headache. He raised his head and suddenly saw Ji Xinyu standing in the shadows not far away as if she was admiring the scenery. His eyes suddenly lit up, and he jumped up from the ground and flew towards her. Brother Shen. Ji Xinyu didn't think that he would be able to see her in the corner when he was coaxing the beauty. It seemed like he wasn't someone who would lose his humanity when he saw the opposite sex. However, wasn't this kid a little too enthusiastic? Judging from her posture, she wanted to give her a big hug. Ji Xinyu's heels spun slightly, and the grass stick in her hand tapped his shoulder, stopping his passionate lunge. Young Marquis Tianheng, calm down, calm down. Although she couldn't use her spiritual power now, her internal power was still very good. Especially her acupoint recognition was amazingly accurate. This little bit made half of Rongyue Tianheng's body numb and he couldn't help but stop in his tracks. Only now did he remember that this younger brother Xinyu didn't like to have physical contact with others. He scratched his head embarrassedly and laughed. Brother, I'm so happy to meet you. He sized up Ji Xinyu again, the happiness on his face not diminishing. Brother Shen is also here to admire the moon. That's great. Let's go together. I was just worried that I wouldn't be able to find a partner. As he spoke, he grabbed Ji Xinyu's hand again. Chapter 2693. Ji Xinyu felt that this brat seemed to have taken the wrong medicine today. He liked to touch her frequently. Although it was nice to meet an old friend, wasn't his happiness a bit too much? She took a step forward, and Rong Juishenheng grabbed empty air again. Ji Shinyu looked at the girl who was staring blankly at them. That girl was very beautiful and had a slim figure. If she wasn't so scared and her face was pale, she would be even more beautiful. Young Marquis, it's better to admire the moon with your close female friends. Don't drag me in. She looked at the girl again. That girl was looking at her eagerly. Her beautiful eyes sparkled under the moonlight, but her body was still trembling. Ji Shinyu couldn't help but feel injustice for the girl. I'm quite curious. Why didn't you ride a cloud and carry her up? Why did she have to climb up herself? Girls are usually a bit timid. You'll scare her like this. The girl looked at Ji Shinyu with even more watery eyes and nodded repeatedly. Rong Juishenheng couldn't help but sigh. I suffered a small injury a few days ago. I can't use my spiritual power for the time being. So they were both in the same boat. Ji Shinyu said sympathetically, I see. How did you get injured? To be injured to the point where you can't use your spiritual power for the time being. Under the moonlight, Rong Juishenheng's handsome face was suspiciously red. This, Ji Shinyu said considerately, it's fine if it's not convenient to say. Rong Yue Tianheng hardened his heart. He felt that brothers should treat each other with sincerity, so there was nothing to hide. Speaking of which, I am ashamed. That night, when we met, I was so happy that I drank a few more cups. I drank until I was dizzy and didn't know why I ran to the burial mound and slept for half the night. You also know that I am afraid of skeletons, but when I woke up, I saw a few skeletons. In a moment of shock, I accidentally rolled down the slope. It was also my bad luck that my Chihai acupoint hit a few vertical ribs, so I let Brother Shin see a joke, Ji Shinyu. She coughed guiltily. That day, she had only taught Rong Juishenheng a small lesson. She had taught him a lesson for saying that she was a piece of trash. She didn't expect that it would cause such an effect. She felt a bit guilty, so she asked with concern, your Chihai point wasn't pierced, right? How many did you pierce in? How deep was it? Are they all grown up now? He then took out 2 packets of top-notch golden sore ointment from his sleeves and eagerly said, Here, this is for you. This golden sore ointment is specially made to treat all kinds of injuries. She then looked at his slightly pale handsome face. You didn't hurt anything important, did you? Rong Yu Tianheng was overwhelmed by the favor. He had been together with Ji Shinyu for so long, and she had always been cold to him. He never thought that she would care about him so much this time. He originally wanted to express that he was fine in a dignified manner, but after thinking about it, he felt that it was rare for Shinyu to be so gentle towards him, therefore, his body swayed slightly. My Chihai acupoint was pierced quite badly. Originally, it was already showing signs of recovery. However, after being hit by Xiao Nan just now, I feel a lot of pain now. He swayed again and took the opportunity to place an arm on her shoulder. Brother Shin, let me lean on you. Ji Shinyu felt guilty in her heart. She couldn't bear to push him away when he leaned over, so she could only help him sit on a large rock. Why are you so weak, oh? Chapter 2694. It was Rong Juishenheng's first time being so close to her. He felt that although she was a man, her body was as soft as a woman's. There was also a faint fragrance on her body, which was extremely pleasant. He wanted to smell her again, but he couldn't help but lean on her shoulder. My body hurts a lot, and my head is a little dizzy. Did you drink? He took the opportunity to sniff her neck again. Ji Shinyu casually pushed his head away and held his wrist, wanting to check his pulse. She then said sarcastically, "You're just being hit by a woman and you're already acting like this. I remember that you were hit by a huge rock back in the floating mountain range and you were still fine." "I wasn't injured then, I'm a little weak now," Rangyushenheng replied. But halfway through, he suddenly sensed something and looked behind Ji Xinyue, eighth cousin brother. Ji Xinyue did not react for a moment. "What eighth cousin brother, ninth cousin brother? You have many relatives." As she said this, she seemed to have thought of something. Her body stiffened, and she turned her head. Not far behind them, there were two people standing. They were Rongyu Yishenlin and Ji Tianyue. They had not seen each other for a while, and Ji Tianyue had changed her clothes. She was wearing a light red dress and a snow-white cloak. Under the contrast of red and white, her small face looked even more tender. As for Rongyu Yishenlin, he was wearing a lake blue robe with wide sleeves. He looked extraordinarily elegant and handsome. The two of them stood there, and the scene looked very harmonious. Rongyu Yishenlin's gaze fell on Ji Xinyue. To be exact, it fell on her hand that was holding Rangyushenheng's. She smiled faintly. "Both of you, what a coincidence." It was indeed a coincidence. Fire Phoenix City was so big, and she had met them twice in such a short time. It was not an ordinary fate. Ji Xinyue silently complained in her heart. She had come to this place to hide, but she did not expect to meet so many acquaintances. Fortunately, she was dressed as a man and looked like Xinyu, so Rongyu Yishenlin and Ji Tianyue would not recognize her. She also did not plan to acknowledge them, so she only nodded at Rongyu Yishenlin and Ji Tianyue, then took Rangyushenheng's pulse. "Your pulse is weak, but it doesn't look like you're seriously injured. You seem to be hungry. Didn't you have dinner?" Rangyushenheng nodded obediently. "Indeed, I didn't eat. I wanted to go to the peak with Xiao Nan to admire the moon while eating, but, no wonder." Ji Xinyu nodded and let go of his hand. She took out a piece of cake from her sleeve. "I have a few more cakes here, do you want to eat them first?" Rong Tianheng's eyes lit up, and he unceremoniously pinched the cake from her hand. "Yes. Brother Shin, you're so considerate. You actually prepared pastries. Could it be that you already guessed that I would come here and specially prepared these?" "Oh." Ji Xinyu thought to herself, "How would I know you would come here? I prepared the pastries for myself to eat while admiring the moon." However, it would be a waste if she didn't sell this favor, so she smiled and didn't say anything. Rong Tianheng swallowed the pastry and smiled. "Delicious. Are there any more?" Ji Xinyue saw him wolfing down the food and felt that he was really hungry. Hearing his question, she immediately reached into her sleeves again. Before she could take it out, there was a slight breeze in front of her and Rongyue Tianlan came directly in front of her. Ji Xinyu was pushed back a few steps by him and raised her eyebrows in surprise. In the afternoon or evening. Chapter 2695. Before she could say anything, Rongyue Tianlan placed 2 fingers on Rongyue Tianheng's wrist. "Are you injured? Let me take your pulse." So they were brothers. Ji Xinyu knew very well how good Rongyue Tianlan's medical skills were. If he was willing to help, it didn't matter how serious Rongyue Tianheng's injury was. Ji Xinyu took another step back, distancing herself from the brothers. She only changed her appearance, but did not change her scent. If she was too close to them, she was afraid that Rongyue Tianlan would recognize her. She turned her head and saw Ji Tianyue looking at her curiously, her big eyes sparkling under the moonlight. "Big brother, why do I feel that you look a little familiar?" Ji Xinyu couldn't help but touch her face. She had only changed her appearance a little, but it was still 50% or 60% similar to her original appearance. She coughed and wanted to gloss over it, probably. I have a common face, no. Ji Tianyue continued to look at her with her head tilted, and suddenly her eyes lit up. You actually look a little like my sister Xinyu. Ji Xinyu laughed. Is that so? She was about to change the topic. Rongyue Tianheng suddenly groaned. Ji Xinyu was shocked and rushed back. What's wrong? Rongyue Tianheng looked at his cousin accusingly, trying to get his wrist back. Pain, but his wrist seemed to be stuck to Rongyue Tianlan's fingers, and he couldn't break free at all. Ji Xinyu didn't know what kind of spell Rongyue Tianlan used to be able to make the other party wail like a ghost and howl like a wolf. Looking at the dense cold sweat on Rongyue Tianheng's forehead, it didn't seem to be an act. She couldn't bear it, this. Eighth Highness, please be gentler. Rongyue Tianlan turned to look at her and said lightly, I can't be gentle. He's seriously injured, so I have to use a heavy technique to unblock his meridians. Ji Xinyu didn't know why, but she felt that Rongyue Tianlan's gaze was exceptionally cold, and his tone was unprecedentedly cold, which made her feel a little confused. Well, he wouldn't hurt his own cousin. He was a doctor, so he had the most authority. Ji Xinyu tactfully took a step back and stopped talking. Rongyue Tianlan probably increased the strength of the technique again, and Rongyue Tianheng finally couldn't help but scream again. It hurts. Cousin, I don't want you to treat me, let go, let go. He desperately wanted to shake off the other party's hand, but he couldn't. Ji Xinyu heard his desperate cries, then looked at his deathly pale face, his dripping sweat, and his tightly clenched lips. This is probably comparable to the pain of a woman giving birth, right? Now that she thought about it, it was all because of her that he had suffered so much. Ji Xinyu felt guilty again. After thinking for a while, she found a thick and hard tree branch and cut it into a short wooden stick. Afraid of cutting Rongyue Tianheng's delicate mouth, she even considerately peeled off the bark and handed it to Rongyue Tianheng. Here, bite it, it will hurt less. Rongyue Tianheng was biting his lips until it hurt. Ji Xinyu's short wooden stick was a timely rein for him. He hurriedly bit it and thanked her. Brother Xin, thank you. You are indeed loyal. He probably suffered another heavy blow, as he screamed again. Gotcha, the short wooden stick in his mouth was bitten off by him. Ji Xinyu, when Rongyue Tianlan finally withdrew his hand, Rongyue Tianheng was already sweating profusely, and his throat was almost hoarse from all the shouting. There's still more in the afternoon. Looking for monthly votes, moi. Chapter 2696. As soon as Rongyue Tianlan let go, he rolled and crawled away, staying far away from him. Eighth cousin, do you have a grudge against me? It was so painful. He felt as if all the veins in his body had been roughly combed by an iron comb. The pain was unbearable. Rongyue Tianlan slowly clapped his hands. Check your body again, see if your injuries have healed. Rongyue Tianheng looked at him suspiciously, then closed his eyes to check his body. After a while, he opened his eyes in surprise and moved his fists and feet a few times. It's really healed. His spiritual power that had been sealed since he was injured started to flow again. Ji Xinyu also breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that Rongyue Tianlan was really treating his cousin and did not mean to torture him. It was just that this method was a little scary. Fortunately, he did not use such a perverted method when he treated her. Rongyue Tianheng was also a tough guy. Once he got better, he immediately became energetic. He glanced at Ji Xinyu, then looked at Rongyue Tianlan. Cousin, whose child is this? She looks so fresh. Could it be that you secretly gave birth to her in another continent? Rongyue Tianlan held the fan in his hand and suppressed the urge to send his cousin flying. She is the youngest daughter of the South Heaven Emperor, Princess Ji Xinyu. Rongyue Tianheng was confused. She is the youngest daughter of the South Heaven Emperor. Your fiancé's younger sister? Your sister-in-law. Strange, why didn't you bring your fiancé to admire the moon, but brought your sister-in-law? Rongyue Tianlan, he suddenly regretted that he did not use more strength when he was healing Rongyue Tianheng, and directly seal his mouth. He glanced at Ji Xinyu, but Ji Xinyu did not look at him. She was looking at Rongyue Tianheng's side in a daze, not knowing what she was thinking. Rongyue Tianlan suddenly felt a little irritated. He said faintly, "My marriage with Ji Xinyu will be annulled. Ji Xinyu is not my sister-in-law." Rongyue Tianheng was stunned. "You still want to annul the marriage? Didn't you say that Ji Xinyu is quite beautiful, not ugly, and has good skills? Such a wife is hard to find even with a lantern. Besides, you've delayed him for more than 3,000 years." When he turned his head, he suddenly discovered that Ji Xinyu was like a flying eagle, directly leaping onto the steep cliff. With a tap of her toes, she sped towards the peak as if she was skiing. He hurriedly took 2 steps forward. "Brother Xin, where are you going?" Ji Xinyue's voice came from afar, admiring the moon on the peak. Although she didn't use her spiritual energy to fly, this kind of gliding looked even more soul-stirring, and her posture was even more free and easy. Rongyue Tianheng suddenly had a competitive heart. He didn't care about gossiping with Rongyue Tianheng anymore. His figure rose and also swept up the cliff. "Brother Xin, wait for me." He chased after him. Little Nan, who had been completely ignored, quickly ran 2 steps forward. "Great swordsman Tianheng, I want to go too. You should just go home. Us brothers are having a gathering. A woman like you shouldn't cause any trouble." Rongyue Tianheng decisively left Xiao Nan behind, and continued to chase after Ji Xinyu. Rongyue Tian stood below and watched as the 2 of them glided all the way and gradually disappeared into the clouds. Her eyes flickered slightly. Ji Xinyu looked very envious. "Brother Rongyue, is this the legendary brotherhood? They have such a good relationship, should we still go up?" Rongyue Tianheng gripped the fan in his hand and chuckled. "Let's go up." "Oh." Chapter 2697. He was obviously smiling, but Ji Tianyue felt that his smile was a little strange. Just as she was about to say, "It's not good to disturb other people's brothers' gathering," Rongyue Tianheng's body slowly flew up, his clothes fluttering, and he had already disappeared into the clouds in the blink of an eye. Ji Tianyue, fortunately, she also knew how to fly on a sword. She took out a small sword, enlarged it, and stood on it to chase after him. There was a bright moon above her head. The mountain wind whistled on the mountain peak. In this season, it was actually a little cold on such an open mountain peak. Fortunately, the mountain peak was high enough. Ji Xinyu used her inner strength to fly up, and at this moment, she was sweating a little, so she didn't feel cold. Rongyue Tianheng, who was beside her, shivered violently. "It's so cold." When he flew up just now, he didn't just use his inner strength, he also used his spiritual power, so he didn't use much strength to climb the mountain peak. In order to look handsome and free, he only wore a thin silk shirt. When the mountain wind blew, he shivered. He looked at Ji Xinyu again. "Brother Xin, I know you've always done things properly and like to prepare for a rainy day. Did you bring an extra robe?" Ji Xinyu rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. "You've been in the Jianghu for so many years, will you always be so cautious?" Ever since she became friends with this guy, she had helped him deal with the aftermath several times. Although Rongyue Tianheng was the same age as her, and even a few months older than her, in Ji Xinyue's eyes, he was like a younger brother. She was never stingy with her friends. She lowered her head and began to check the clothes in her storage space. "You're taller than me, my clothes won't fit you, I'll find you a bigger one." Rongyue Tianheng wasn't picky, It's okay, actually I'm just a little taller than you, just find me a thick one and let me wear it. Just as he said this, a robe covered his head, covering his entire face. Rangi Yushinheng pulled the robe off his head in a flurry. I'll wear it myself. Before he finished his sentence, he suddenly choked. He looked at Ji Shinyu, who had just pulled out a robe and had yet to hand it over. He then looked at eighth cousin who was standing not far away. Cousin, you're here too. He then shook the robe in his hands. So you also have a spare robe? He happily put it on. Your robe is just right for me, it's even longer. Rongyue Tianheng was slightly shorter than Rongyue Tianlan. His robe was a little too long for him. Rongyue Tian's voice was cold. You're still young and you haven't grown up yet. It's not good for you to have some messy thoughts, lest it spoils your cultivation and prevents you from growing taller. Rongyue Tianheng was confused by his scolding. Ah! What kind of weird thoughts did I have? He retorted, I'm not young anymore. I'm already 3,112 years old this year. I'm already an adult. At this age, I can already marry a wife, he then proudly said, it's just that I'm very picky. A person like me must marry a peerless beauty. It's best if her martial arts are better so that I can spar with her. Sigh, it's a pity that such good women are few and far between. I've been drifting on this continent for many years, but I haven't found a suitable one. It seems like I can only be a wild crane for the time being. He seemed to have thought of something. Ah, right, cousin, I heard that Princess Ji Shinyu is beautiful and capable, and her martial arts are high. You should have seen her, is that true? Chapter 2698. Rangi Yishinlin frowned slightly. Before he could say anything, Ji Tianyue, who had just flown up, said, Of course my sister is the best. Among my sisters, she is the most beautiful and has the best martial arts. She even personally picked the immortal snow lotus for my mother. Rangi Yushinheng's eyes lit up. This immortal snow lotus is not easy to pick. There is a fire dragon guarding it. Your sister can actually defeat the fire dragon alone and pick this immortal snow lotus. Amazing. Really amazing. He then looked at Ji Tianyue and gave her a thumbs up. Little princess, you are also quite capable. You flew up such a high mountain by yourself. I thought your cousin would carry you up. By the way, how is your martial arts? Ji Tianyue blushed a little. My martial arts are very shallow. Father doesn't let me practice fighting martial arts. No one taught me. Rangi Yushinheng raised his eyebrows. Your sister is so good at fighting, can't she teach you? Ji Tianyue lowered her eyes sadly. Father doesn't let my sister teach me, she can't do anything. She actually wants to teach me. Your foundation is good, it's a pity that you don't practice. Rangi Yushinheng's handsome face showed regret. Ji Tianyue's eyes lit up. You said so too. By the way, brother Rongyue also said so. He also proposed to father that he wanted to guide me in my cultivation, and father agreed. Rangi Yushinheng was surprised and looked at his cousin. You want to accept this little princess as your disciple? Brother Rongyue doesn't accept disciples, he said that he only needs to guide me. Ji Tianyue's voice had some regret. Rangi Yushinheng looked at his cousin again and smiled meaningfully. So that's how it is. Although Rangi Yushinheng didn't have a chance to get along with his eighth cousin, he still heard some stories about him. He knew that although his eighth cousin had a reputation of being a playboy and there were women all over the world who admired him, it was only these women who pursued him openly and secretly. He had never heard of any stories about him and any woman. He seemed to be gentle and polite to women, but in fact, he was quite indifferent and didn't like to meddle in other people's business. Even if a woman fell in front of him, he might not be willing to take the initiative to save her. For such a person to make such an exception for a little girl like Ji Tianyue, there must be some inside story. He wanted to impart martial arts to him, but he didn't want to take him in as a disciple. Could it be that eighth elder brother has fallen in love with this little girl? Eighth cousin brother's taste is so heavy. He looked at the two people standing together, and suddenly felt indignant for Princess Xinyu, whom he had never met before. He glanced at his cousin, your marriage with Princess Xinyu. Are you really going to cancel it? Rong Yuetian nodded slightly. He did not look at Ji Xinyu, and only said, she and I are not fated to be together. She also wanted to withdraw. But you've delayed me for so many years. Rong Yuetian was expressionless. It's not that much of a delay. Maybe she already has someone else in her heart. Annulling this marriage is also a kind of blessing. These were his heartfelt words, but after he said them, his heart felt as if it was being squeezed by something. When they were chatting, Ji Xinyu was too lazy to interrupt, but that didn't mean she couldn't hear them. Rong Yuetian's words made her frown. Rong Yuetian was interested in her little sister, she could tell when they were drinking in the restaurant. Chapter 2699. It would be a lie to say that she didn't care at all. After all, this person was still her fiancé in name. Now that he had taken a fancy to her little sister, she felt as if she had been struck by lightning. However, there was indeed a kind of love in this world called love at first sight. Perhaps Rongyue Tianlan had really fallen in love with her little sister at first sight. After all, her little sister was so cute and lovable. However, if he liked her little sister, then so be it. She wouldn't say anything. However, if he said that she, Ji Xinyu, had someone else in her heart, wouldn't that be nonsense? Since when did she have someone in her heart? She didn't even know if her so-called sweetheart was out of her mother's womb. She really wanted to refute him, but when she thought of her current identity, she shut her mouth again. When she raised her head, she saw that Rongyue Tianlan's gaze was on her face. Their gazes met, and Ji Xinyu felt that she had met him once with her current identity. He had even helped her slay the dragon and saved her once. They weren't strangers, so she smiled faintly at him as a form of greeting. However, her smile in Rongyue Tianlan's eyes seemed to be a tacit acknowledgement of his words. His gaze turned cold. He stared at her for a moment, then looked away. Although Ji Xinyu had always been careless, she could still distinguish whether other people's gazes were malicious or kind. Rongyue Tianlan's gaze towards her was unfriendly, which made her a little confused. Could it be that he was angry that she had turned around and left after slaying the dragon? However, he had also taken all the credit, all right. What else was he dissatisfied with? Ji Xinyu had never been one to stick her warm face on someone's cold buttocks. Since he was cold, she would naturally be cold too. The interaction between the four people at the back was a little subtle. Ji Xinyu deeply felt that among the four people present, she was the most scheming and had the most capital to walk the Jianghu. Because no matter where she went, she liked to bring dry food and wine with her. Of course, the dry food she brought wasn't ordinary dry food, but some freshly preserved snacks and dishes that she had packed from the restaurant. As for wine, that was her favorite. It was the wine from the southernmost Luotian Xiang clan in the city. The wine from this clan was mellow and sweet, with a strong kick to it. After drinking a mouthful, a cooling spiciness would flow down her throat like a thread of ice, followed by warmth. In such cold weather, this type of wine was the most suitable. She had always liked the wine from this house, so she brought 2 more gourds with her when she came to admire the moon. These 2 gourds of wine were enough for her to drink alone, and she might not even be able to finish them. But now that there were 3 more, she couldn't drink alone, so she could only reluctantly take them out. Of course, she couldn't hide the dishes and wine, so she put them out as well. 4 plates of dishes and 2 plates of desserts were placed on a large rock, looking a little desolate. Ji Shinyu cast a hopeful gaze at Rong Yue Tianlan. Since you have brought a beauty to admire the moon, you must have brought food as well. Please share it with us. Rong Yue Tian simply shook her head. No. Ji Shinyu was speechless. She felt a little disdainful. When she was at the restaurant, she had seen him buy some snacks. But at this time, she couldn't point it out, so she turned her gaze to Ji Tianyu. Her little sister was innocent and had always been easy to deceive, so she didn't know how to lie. Her voice was gentle. Little sister, do you have any food that you want to contribute? Ji Tianyu nodded obediently. Yes. Then she looked at Rong Yue Tianlan with her big eyes. Brother Rong Yue, can you take out the snacks that I bought? Chapter 2700. Rongyu Ishanlan couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He glanced at Ji Shinyu and asked, You really want hers? Ji Shinyu crossed her arms and said with a faint smile, Since we're admiring the moon together, we should share our food. Of course, if you don't want to share, it's not convenient for me to share mine with you. Or the two of you can go over there and admire the moon, we'll go our separate ways. Ji Shinyu subconsciously felt nervous sitting with him. If she could take the opportunity to chase him away, it would be good. But she obviously miscalculated. Before she finished speaking, Rongyu Ishanlan began to take things out slowly. A bag of melon seeds, a bag of peanuts, a bag of plums, a sugar doll, 2 sticks of sugar-coated haws, and a huge cotton candy. Ji Shinyu, Rongyu Ishanhang's lips twitched. These are all children's snacks. Wouldn't they be laughed at for drinking and eating children's snacks? Rongyu Ishanlan glanced at Ji Shinyu lightly, can't help it. This brother Shin even wants children's snacks. Tianyu has always been generous, she won't hide anything. Ji Shinyu clenched her fists in her sleeves. He said it as if she was hiding something. She was the only one contributing in this group, the other 3 were all freeloaders. He still had the face to say that. But how to refute his words was a problem. Ji Shinyu wasn't very eloquent, she couldn't think of anything at this moment. Rongyu Ishanlan looked at her tense face and was a little puzzled. Brother Shin, why didn't you ask Tianheng if you only asked the 2 of us? Maybe he brought a lot of things too. Ji Shinyu sneered and said almost without thinking, him. He wouldn't bring anything. He only brought his mouth. I bet he didn't even bring a bag of melon seeds. This guy never liked to bring things. Every time they fought monsters together, he would come to eat her food and drink her wine. Rongyu Ishanhang's eyes sparkled. He put his arm on Ji Shinyu's shoulder. Brother Shin, you know me best. You're indeed my confidant. Come, let's drink a big cup first. He picked up a wine gourd and wanted to pour it directly into his mouth. Ji Shinyu reacted quickly and snatched it away from him, then gave him a wine cup. Use this. Rong Yue Tianheng looked at the wine glass in his hand, and then looked at her. He was moved. This is the wine glass I used last time, right? I didn't expect you to keep it for me. Brother Shin, you are so good to me. The wine cup in his hand was an antique treasure that he had unintentionally picked up in a black market. Its value was quite considerable. The last time he drank, he happened to have this on him, so he took it out to drink with Ji Shinyu. However, he had always been a forgetful person, so no matter how good something was in his hands, it was like floating clouds. While he was drinking, he received a letter from home, asking him to go back quickly. He ran away without saying a word. This wine cup had fallen into Ji Shinyu's hands. Ji Shinyu thought that this guy often came to drink wine with her, and didn't like to bring his own wine set. He always wanted to snatch the wine cup in her hands to use. She had taught him a few lessons, but none of them worked. So that time, she put his cup away so that this fellow could come and drink more. As it turned out, she had great foresight. Ji Shinyu praised herself in her heart. Of course, she also accepted all of Rong Yusheng's words of gratitude. Therefore, she smiled. Chapter 2701. Of course, she also accepted Rong Yusheng's words of gratitude. So she smiled and casually replied, "It's good that you know I'm good to you. Tonight, I'll leave the task of pouring wine to you." Rong Yusheng almost patted his chest. "Don't worry, leave it to me." Ji Shinyu cast a sidelong glance at him. "Brother." This kid was getting bolder and bolder. Rong Yusheng laughed dryly. "It's me, your brother. Little Shen, I'm a few months older than you after all. Actually, it's not a problem for you to call me brother." Ji Shinyu glanced at him and said casually, "When you can beat me, then expect me to call you brother." Rong Yusheng lowered his head. "This is difficult." He poured a glass of wine and drank it desolately. "This wish of his would probably be difficult to fulfill in this lifetime. If I can beat you, will you call me brother?" Rong Yusheng said with a faint smile. This sentence could almost be called flirting. Ji Shinyu looked at him strangely. Was this person crazy? This was between her and Rong Yusheng. Wasn't his mouth a little too abrupt? "Tianheng and I are friends. Friends are just joking. You don't have to interfere anymore." Ji Shinyu also drank a mouthful of wine. "You and I can't even be considered friends." Rong Yusheng's smile deepened, but there seemed to be a touch of coldness in his sparkling eyes. Was this person here to bicker with her? Ji Shinyu frowned. She felt that Rong Yusheng was targeting her tonight. Before she opened her mouth, Rong Yusheng smiled and said, "Cousin, although you've always been more outstanding than me, the relationship between Brother Shin and I, you can't compare to it. After all, this is the first time you've met. It's a little too early to talk about friendship." Rong Yusheng looked at Ji Shinyu again. "This is the first time we've met." Ji Shinyu pondered for a moment, then finally said, "It's only the second time." Rong Yusheng's eyes widened. "So you've met before, when?" "Brother Shin, I've never heard you mention this." Ji Shinyu glanced at him. "It's just a small matter, and there's no need for me to report my whereabouts to you, is there?" Rong Yuetianhuan scratched his head. "That's not what I meant. I just thought that my cousin is so outstanding, no matter what, you would mention him to others. Besides, when you two met just now, I couldn't tell that you two had met before." Ji Shinyu's head was starting to hurt. She rubbed her forehead and said, "I'm not as nosy as you are. Besides, he's just someone I met by chance. There's no need for me to tell him." After he finished speaking, Ji Shinyu felt that the surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped. The breeze on the mountain peak was as cold as a small knife. She subconsciously hugged her arms and inadvertently raised her head. She saw Rong Yuetianlan looking at her with narrowed eyes. Her expression was somewhat unfathomable. She couldn't even tell if she was happy or angry. Ji Shinyu had always lived in the eyes of others. If she wanted to live a carefree life, she couldn't care less about the eyes of others. She had to treat them as floating clouds. After living in the midst of trouble for so long, some people had become extremely sensitive, while others had trained their nerves to be thicker than steel. She didn't care about those messy eyes at all. Ji Shinyu obviously belonged to the latter. So she glanced at Rong Yuetianlan inexplicably, then turned her gaze away. She didn't care at all. Chapter 2702. Therefore, she glanced at Rong Yuetianlan inexplicably, then looked away. She was too lazy to guess what Rong Yuetianlan was feeling at the moment. Rong Yuetianlan looked at her for a moment, then suddenly said, since there are 4 people drinking, where are the other 2 cups? Ji Shinyu frowned slightly. Well, I didn't know there would be so many people, so I brought my cup and his with me. She wasn't someone who often invited people to drink. Rongyue Tianlan's fingers clenched slightly in his sleeve. It seems that your relationship is really good. Rongyue Tianheng smiled so widely that his teeth could be seen. He put his arm on Ji Shinyu's shoulder. Of course. We are friends who have gone through life and death together, the kind who will never leave each other. Ji Shinyu's lips twitched. This brat's words today were really annoying. However, what he said couldn't be considered wrong. They were indeed friends, and had gone through thick and thin together a few times. It wouldn't be appropriate to refute this at this time, so she smiled and didn't say anything. She picked up a cup of wine and said, "Come, let's toast to our friendship." She took the opportunity to push his wolf claws down. Rongyue Tianhuan naturally clinked his cup with hers, then drank it in one gulp. He smacked his lips and turned to show off to Rongyue Tianlan, 8th cousin. Brother Shin and I are not only close friends, even our interests and hobbies are similar. For example, this wine, I like this Luotian incense. Coincidentally, Brother Shin also likes this. Don't you think this is fate? Ji Shinyu's hands trembled at his words. This brat spoke as if he was possessed today. What did he mean by fate? Wasn't that used to describe husband and wife or lovers? However, could family and friendship also be used as a metaphor? Ji Shinyu couldn't make up her mind. Although Rongyue Tianhuan had the reputation of being proficient in both literature and martial arts, he wasn't very accomplished in literature. Occasionally, he would use idioms wrongly. So even if he used the wrong example now, it was understandable. Rongyue Tianlan's lips curled up slightly. He didn't say anything. A cup appeared between his fingers, and he poured himself a cup of wine. He took a sip, frowned, and said faintly, "This wine doesn't suit my taste, it's too bland." Rongyue Tianhuan was not convinced. This wine is strong enough, it has a lot of aftershocks. You freeloader, don't be picky. If you have the ability, bring out a better wine. Ji Shinyu rubbed the space between her eyebrows. Now is not the time to argue. He didn't bring anything with him, where would he get good wine? Don't talk about such trivial matters. Before he could finish his sentence, he suddenly shut his mouth and his gaze fell on Rongyue Tianlan's fingers. Like a magic trick, Rongyue Tianlan conjured a jar of wine from her fingertips. He peeled off the clay seal on the jar, and a strong and sweet wine aroma immediately overflowed. Ji Shinyu loved wine, so she could tell the quality of the wine just by smelling it. Now that she smelled it, she felt refreshed, and all the pores on her body seemed to open up. Good wine. 2 simple words seemed to be unable to describe the quality of this wine. Ji Shinyu had been drinking wine for so many years, but compared to this wine, all those wines seemed unbearable. Rongyue Tianhuan almost reached out to grab the wine jug. Good wine. 8th cousin brother, why did you only bring out such good wine now? Come, fill it, fill it. He put the wine cup in his hand directly under the wine jug. Oh. Chapter 2703. Rongyue Tianlan took back the jug and said indifferently, "Don't you like to drink this Luotian xiang? My wine may not be to your taste, so you shouldn't drink it." Rongyue Tianheng was speechless. Should he take back what he just said? Rongyue Tianlan's eyes fell on Ji Shinyue. Would you like to try it? Ji Shinyue said straightforwardly, "Okay." Rongyue Tianlan smiled. Don't you only drink one type of wine? Ji Shinyue raised her eyebrows. When did I say I only drink one type of wine? I like all good wines. Rongyue Tianlan smiled and poured for her. Please taste it. Rongyue Tianheng came over with a drooling face. I'm also a wine taster, 8th cousin, let me taste this wine too. Rongyue Tianlan didn't give him any face. You're a wine taster? Then can you smell what this wine is made of? If you can name 3 types, I'll treat you to it. Rongyue Tianheng sniffed hard and tried to guess. There's sorghum. Rongyue Tianlan was speechless. You can't even guess the main ingredient. How can you call yourself a wine taster? Rongyue Tianheng was not convinced. You just let me smell it. How can I guess? I have to taste it. He then turned to Ji Xinhue for help. Brother Xin, don't you think so? This. Ji Xinhue coughed, a little ashamed of Rongyue Tianheng's white eyes. A wine taster could at least smell most of the ingredients. Rongyue Tianheng was probably the only one who couldn't smell a single type and still called himself a wine taster. She looked up and saw Rongyue Tianlan looking at her with a smile. If you can name 3 types, you can also drink this wine on his behalf. Ji Xinhue's fingertips turned the wine cup. Really? I'm not lying. Ji Xinhue smiled. What if I can name 5 or 6 types? Rongyue Tianlan paused. I'll just give you that jug of wine. Even the world's famous wine tasters could only name 5 or 6 types after tasting the wine, and that was under the circumstances of being extremely knowledgeable about wine. But now, she was able to identify 5 or 6 different types just by smelling them. That was impossible. Ji Xinyu laughed again. That's a good condition. Then listen carefully. The main ingredient of this wine should be a type of rice that grows in extremely cold places. Only the first half of the embryo is taken. As soon as she said this, Rongyue Tianheng shook his head with a smile. How can a place of extreme cold produce rice? And only the first half. Isn't this just messing around? Before he could finish his words, he felt his mouth tighten, as if someone had sealed it. Rongyu Yishenlen looked at Ji Xinyu, a light flashing in her eyes. Continue. Ji Xinyu did not stand on ceremony and continued. The wine made from this rice is extremely cold, so we need to use something produced in a very hot place to cool it down. If my guess is correct, this wine should have been mixed with the juice of tourmaline grass. The taste of tourmaline grass is bitter, so we also need to use a fruit to press it down. This fruit is called the fruit of mystery, and it needs to be picked in the morning when it has been washed with frost. Ji Xinyu spoke with fervor and assurance. Not only did she name 6 types of raw materials in one breath, she also mentioned the characteristics of these 6 types of raw materials and the necessary conditions to harvest them. As soon as she finished speaking, the peak fell into silence. Rongyue Tianheng's eyes darted around. He wanted to open his mouth but could not speak. After a while, Ji Tianyue interrupted. Brother Rongyue, is he right? Chapter 2704. Rongyue Tianlan looked at Ji Xinyu with a complicated gaze, and a hint of passion flashed through his eyes. He nodded slowly. Not bad. You're right. I admire you. He was good at brewing wine, and usually had time, so in order to brew a jar of good wine, he would work hard and run around, just to brew the best wine. The wine he brewed was one of the best in the Tianxi continent, and no one could compare to it. Even Di Zun often came up with all kinds of reasons to drink his wine, thinking of ways to get his wine. But Di Zun was a lazy person. He only liked to drink, but was too lazy to taste the wine, and was too lazy to guess the ingredients used in the wine. To him, wine was enough as long as it tasted good. As for the ingredients, in Di Zun's eyes, they were like floating clouds. So Rongyue Tianlan would occasionally feel that his family's good cabbage had been eaten by a pig, a regret that he couldn't find a soulmate. It was even more so in the Fanning continent. There were even fewer people who knew about wine. He didn't expect Ji Xinyu to be an expert in this field. She could say so much with just a sniff, and so accurately, it was simply impressive. Ji Tianyu was also excited. Brother Rongyue, I want to drink too. I want to try good wine too. Rongyue Tianlon didn't refuse, and casually conjured another cup, wanting to fill it for her. Ji Xinyu frowned slightly, and reached out to stop him. She's still a child, are you really letting her drink? Rongyue Tianlon then reacted, and raised his hand to rub Ji Tianyu's head. Children can't drink, you should just eat. Ji Tianyu pouted, can I just try one cup? Not even one cup. Ji Xinyu said directly. Children were not yet fully developed. Once they drank, it was easy for the alcohol to enter the brain and cause poisoning. If it wasn't done well, the child might become stupid from drinking. Ji Xinyu was used to protecting her sister, so she naturally didn't want her to drink. Rongyue Tianlon was also good at medicine, so he naturally understood this. Now that he reacted, he naturally wouldn't let Ji Tianyu drink. Ji Tianyu pouted even higher, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't recognize her sister, and thought that the person in front of her didn't want her to drink the wine she already had. Ji Xinyu couldn't bear to see her cry. She thought for a moment, then took out a bottle from her storage space. Come, Tianyu, drink this. This one suits you. It was a jar of fruit honey. Ji Tianyu took a sip and her eyes lit up. She liked to drink this. Thank you, Brother Shin. This suits my taste very well. Ji Xinyu's voice was gentle, if you like it, then drink more. She had originally bought this bottle for her sister, she had just taken it out in advance. Rongyue Tianlon was someone who kept her word, and directly gave the jar of wine to Ji Xinyu. In Ji Xinyu's hands, there would naturally be good wine for everyone to drink. Rongyue Tianheng could finally drink it. Rongyue Tianheng drank the wine he liked. Naturally, he didn't blame Rongyue Tianlon for sealing his mouth. The four of them sat on the four sides of the big rock, tasting the wine and admiring the moon. Ji Tianyu was also happy. She had been locked up in the palace for a long time, and this was the first time she was gathering with these people of the Jianghu. She felt that they were living very freely, and her big eyes were filled with envy. The only thing that made her a little depressed was that she couldn't get a word in most of what these people were talking about. There were many things that she didn't understand. Sitting at the side, it seemed that she could only drink fruit juice and eat. Chapter 2705. She was unwilling to be left out and suddenly suggested, Brother Rongyue, Brother Shin, can I dance for you? No one present objected. Rongyue Tianlon even took out a flute and said, I'll accompany you. Ji Tianyue's eyes lit up. She hugged his arm and kissed him on the cheek. I knew Brother Rongyue treats me the best. Ji Xinyue was stunned. She didn't expect her little sister to be so open. It seemed like they had only known each other for a day. Could this be the legendary love at first sight, falling in love at first sight? But wasn't her little sister a little too open? After all, Rongyue Tianlon was still her fiancé. As long as the engagement was not cancelled, he was still her real brother-in-law. Was it really good to be so passionate about a brother-in-law whom she had only known for a day? Moreover, she was still an underage child. What was she doing when she was her age? She was suppressed by all kinds of rumors and felt inferior. Every day, she hid in a corner of the palace like a mouse. When she saw people whispering, she thought they were gossiping about her. At that time, she only faintly felt that she had such an unreliable fiancé. She didn't even know what fiancé meant. She only knew that it was this fiancé who pushed her into hell. She hated him so much. From then on, she was especially disgusted with the word fiancé. At that time, she didn't know what the relationship between a man and a woman was. Now that her little sister was doing this, did she already know about the relationship between a man and a woman? Or did she treat Rongyue Tianlon as a man who could be close to like her father, a child's intimacy? Rongyue Tianlan was also slightly stunned. With his martial arts, if he didn't want her to kiss Ji Tianyue, the sneak attack wouldn't have succeeded. If his face could be kissed so easily, then his face would have been covered in layers and layers of lipstick marks by now. When Ji Tianyue pounced over, he seemed to want to block, but suddenly remembered something. His arm froze again. After a short pause, Ji Tianyue succeeded in stealing the kiss. Rongyue Tianlan glanced at Ji Xinyue. She was in a daze. He didn't know what she was thinking. She looked at Ji Tianyue and seemed to have some doubts. Rongyue Tianheng laughed out loud. What a fiery little princess. Little Tianyue, do you like this brother Rongyue? He's your brother-in-law. Ji Tianyue's face was as red as a tomato. She pursed her lips and said crisply, Brother Rongyu doesn't like my sister Xinyu. They will break off the engagement, so he is not my brother-in-law. Ji Xinyu's hand that was holding the wine glass paused for a moment. Although what her little sister said was true, but hearing her say it now, she still felt that it was a little jarring. In the imperial palace, she doted on her younger sister the most, but her younger sister actually said such words in front of strangers. She glanced at Rongyue Tianlan, then looked at her younger sister with a smile. How did you know that they would break off the engagement? She didn't remember telling her younger sister. As for Rongyue Tianlan, he shouldn't be that gossipy, right? Ji Tianyue lowered her head slightly. I heard it from my sister and father personally. They said that they will go to the marriage pillar to cancel the engagement in a few days, so it can't be fake. Ji Xinyue. So Lil Sis had eavesdropped. After saying those words to imperial father, because she was not in a good mood, she took a long stroll outside before returning to her own courtyard. In the end, she saw Rongyue Tianlan and her little sister getting along well in her own courtyard. Chapter 2706. If that was the case, then her younger sister had used the butterfly to look for her elder sister, but she had actually gone after Rongyue Tianlan. She looked at Ji Tianyue with a complicated gaze. Her little sister was so young, yet she already had such a scheming mind. Rongyue Tianheng didn't expect that his joke would lead to Ji Tianyu's confession to his eighth cousin. He slightly choked and subconsciously frowned. Little Tianyu, is your sister Xinyu good to you? Sure. Ji Tianyue answered without hesitation. But what you're doing now is equivalent to stealing your sister's man. That's not very kind of you. Ji Tianyue blinked her eyes. They're about to break off the engagement. The only thing missing was a ceremony. That doesn't count as stealing big sister's men, right? This. Rangi Yushinheng rubbed his nose. He felt that what Ji Tianyue said made sense, but he subconsciously felt that something was wrong. He paused. Then what do you like about Brother Rongyu? Ji Tianyue thought for a moment and counted with her fingers. Brother Rongyue is handsome and capable. He is a dragon slayer hero. He also knew a lot of skills, and these skills were all top-notch. I fell in love with her the moment I saw her. Rongyue Tianheng had always known that his eighth cousin brother was attracting girls, but he didn't expect that he would even attract underage girls. He looked at Rongyue Tianlan. Rongyue Tianlan seemed to be quite shocked as well. She held the wine cup in her hand for a long time without drinking. He frowned slightly. He wanted to say something, but he didn't. Rongyue Tianheng thought for a moment. Little Tianyu, have you discussed this matter with your sister Xinyu? Ji Tianyue shook her head. There's no need to discuss it. My sister dotes on me a lot and is willing to give me anything. As long as I want it, she will give it to me. Even if she doesn't want to break off the engagement, as long as Rongyue Gij doesn't like her and likes me, she will give him to me without a second word. This theory was truly valiant. Rongyue Tianheng couldn't help but argue with her. What if she doesn't let you? She also really likes you, brother Rongyue. After all, they are a proper fiancé and fiancée. It's engraved on the marriage pillar. Ji Tianyue's mouth was slightly agape as if she had never thought of this question. He was stunned for a moment before he added, there's no such thing as if. She has already discussed this with Imperial Father. Even if it's agreed, it might not be true. Didn't they agree on their marriage back then? Wasn't she going to break off the engagement now? I'm only asking you, what will you do if your sister doesn't let you? Are you going to back out? Rongyue Tianheng pressed on. Ji Tianyue was obviously anxious. Her pretty face was flushed red and she couldn't say anything for a while. Rongyue Tianlan, who was at the side, finally spoke. His voice was cold and emotionless. Her sister may be eager to give up this marriage. Tianheng, don't make things difficult for a child here. Ji Tianyue was originally about to cry, but when she heard Rongyue Tianlan's words, her small face immediately glowed. Even brother Rongyue said that my sister would give in. Therefore, there's no mistake. Rongyue Ishanlan pondered for a moment and said, Tianyue, you are still a child. It is too early to think about these things. When you are older and more mature, it will not be too late to think about these things. Alright, let's go dance. If we don't dance, the moon will be leaning to the west. Brother Rongyue, I'm not young anymore. I'm 520 years old this year. When you and my sister Xinyu were engaged, she was only a little more than a year old. Ji Tianyue didn't give up. Chapter 2707. Rongyue Tianlan's lips twitched and he said seriously, so I don't want to make the same mistake twice. Do you understand? When his handsome face sank, it was still very imposing, but also a little cold. Ji Tianyue was stunned. She was still afraid of him, so she paused and said, I'm going to dance. After such a conversation, Rongyue Tianlan seemed a little absent-minded. When he was accompanying Ji Tianyue, he played a few wrong notes. Ji Tianyue also seemed a little absent-minded. She sat there and drank cup after cup of wine. Her alcohol tolerance had always been not small. It could be said that she would not get drunk even after 1,000 cups. But this night, perhaps because of her physical condition, after 2 hours, she was a little drunk and her head was a little dizzy. Fortunately, she still knew that she could not get drunk here. She found an excuse and stood up, I can't hold my liquor. The three of you can continue to play here. I'll take my leave first. Rongyue Tianheng looked at her slightly staggered footsteps and quickly stood up, I'll send you down. No need, I can go down by myself. It was just a steep mountain, it was not difficult for her. She strode to the edge of the cliff. Even if she could not fly with her spiritual force, with her qin gong, it was not difficult to fly down. Looking at the protruding stone on the cliff, she rubbed her eyes and calmed herself down. When she looked down again, the stone finally stopped shaking. She smiled in relief and was just about to jump down when she saw the right spot. She was not prepared for a sudden flash in front of her eyes. Her waist was tightened and she was carried by someone, I'll take you down. The faint fragrance of plum blossoms entered her nose. Ji Tianyue subconsciously raised her hand to push him, hey. No need. Before she could finish her sentence, she was already lifted into the air and flew down the mountain in the blink of an eye. Rongyue Tianheng, his seemingly gentle but actually unapproachable eighth cousin actually carried hero Xinyu down in a princess carry. This was a little shocking to his eyes. At the same time, a strange feeling arose in his heart, as if something that originally belonged to him was suddenly snatched away. Ji Tianyue also opened her mouth slightly and ran to the edge of the mountain in disbelief. She watched helplessly as her brother Rong Yu carried brother Shen and rode a cloud down the mountain peak, disappearing into the clouds and mist. She bit her lip slightly. Although brother Rong Yu doted on her, he had never hugged her like this. At most, he would stroke her head in the same way as her father did. She thought for a moment and suddenly ran back. She picked up the wine jar and declared, "I want a drink too." Rongyue Tianhuan jumped in fright and snatched it from her. "Children shouldn't drink." No, I want a drink. If I drink too much, brother Rongyue will also hug me. Ji Tianyue revealed her purpose, "Give me the wine." Rongyue Tianhuan was speechless. He simply threw the wine jar into the storage space. "If I say no, then no. Children will become stupid when they drink too much. You don't want to become stupid." He changed the topic, "But if you want him to hug you, you can't just get drunk." Ji Tianyue's eyes immediately brightened. "What other methods are there? For example, if you fall or bump into something and hurt your leg." Rongyue Tianheng came up with a bad idea and then looked at her with a smile. A little princess raised in the palace must be afraid of pain. She would definitely be reluctant to hurt her leg. Chapter 2708. Unexpectedly, as soon as he finished speaking, Ji Tianyue nodded in agreement. "That's a good idea." Then, she suddenly slammed her head against a rock. Rongjui Shenhuan didn't expect her to do that and didn't stop her. Then, he watched as her legs were dyed red with blood at a speed visible to the naked eye. "Is this okay?" Ji Tianyue's face was pale from the pain, but she still smiled. Rongjui Shenhuan was speechless. He had the urge to slap himself. At the same time, he felt a chill in his heart. This little girl was not as innocent as she looked. She was ruthless. If his eighth cousin really liked her and they got married, then it was fine. But if he didn't like her, he didn't know what this little girl would do with her resolute personality. His eighth cousin's love life might not be smooth. Rongjui Shenhuan lit a candle for his eighth cousin in his heart. Rongjui Shenhuan thought that his eighth cousin would send someone down and come back in at most 15 minutes. He didn't expect that half an hour had passed, and there was still no trace of him. It was just sending someone away. He didn't have to sing a song of 10 miles down there, right? Why didn't he come back up? Rongjui Shenhuan was very puzzled. He glanced at Ji Tianyue beside him. The little girl's leg was bleeding a lot, almost forming a blood pool on the ground. Her little face was getting paler and paler. The little girl probably wanted her brother Rongjuishan to see her like this and pity her. Not only would he personally bandage her wound, but he would also carry her directly back to the palace. So, she didn't allow Rongjui Shenhuan to bandage her wound, and she didn't even use his medicine. She just stared at the place where Rongjuishan had jumped. Her eyes lit up at the slightest movement, but she was soon disappointed. Rongjui Shenhuan couldn't bear to see her like this. He took out a bandage from nowhere and handed it over. "Why don't you bandage yourself first? It's not good to keep bleeding." He still wanted to drink, but he didn't have the appetite to see a little girl bleeding like a river. Moreover, this little girl was someone that his eighth cousin cared about. If he just stood there and watched while she bled, his eighth cousin would probably hit him with a fan. Ji Tianyue bit her lips and was about to cry. "No. Why isn't he back yet?" Rongyue Tianhuan rubbed his forehead. I really don't know. Perhaps he feels like old friends with Brother Shin at first sight and wants to say goodbye. Don't worry, you're still here. He'll come back sooner or later. After another quarter of an hour, Ji Tianyue was bleeding so much that her vision was turning black. However, there was still no sign of Rongyu Yishenlin. Why isn't he back yet? Woo-woo, he might as well let me bleed to death here and make him regret it. The little girl's tears began to fall, and she could not help but say some harsh words. The veins on Rongyue Tianhuan's temples throbbed. Actually, he hated women who used these tricks of crying, throwing a tantrum, and threatening to commit suicide. He felt that it was extraordinarily troublesome. Who would have thought that this little girl, who was as beautiful as a glaze, would be no exception? This surprised him a little, and even made him a little disappointed. He was beautiful, and although his kung fu was not as good as Ji Xinyu's, he was still one of the best in the Sanskrit continent. He also had a noble status, so he was quite popular with women. The number of people who wanted to marry him could line up for miles. He could be considered a playboy. However, he had also grown up in the palace. Chapter 2709. However, he also grew up in the palace and saw with his own eyes how the women in the harem fought over a man, using all kinds of jealousy, all kinds of obstacles, and all kinds of underhanded methods. This made him feel that these women were somewhat disgusting in the eyes of an outsider, making him unable to arouse any interest. To be honest, he somewhat looked down on these women, so when he was with them, he was just putting on a show and taking what he needed. He always felt that a wanderer like him would not stay for any woman, and he did not have the thought of marrying anyone. He originally saw that Ji Tianyu was innocent and direct, and felt that she was different from the rest. He even thought that this little girl might grow up to be a clear stream in the turbid current, but he did not expect that she would also do such things. She was indeed a child who grew up in the palace. After watching so many palace dramas, she unknowingly used such methods. He did not know what kind of personality Ji Xinyu had. Listening to the rumors, she was actually quite outstanding. He just did not know if eighth cousin's head had been kicked by a donkey, only thinking of breaking off the engagement. No. If he really broke off the engagement with Ji Xinyu, then wouldn't his uncle the emperor force him to take the blame again? Rongyue Tianheng shuddered and deeply worried about this. He was still young and dissolute, and wanted to be free for a few more years. He did not want to be implicated by a family so soon. What's more, he did not have a serious love, and he was not willing to walk into the grave of marriage like this. If he wanted to marry, he would marry the girl he liked. Only then would he be worthy of the title of dissolute young master. He thought about all the girls he knew in his mind, and felt that none of them were worthy of him. He was not willing to marry anyone. Although he knew all kinds of girls, he did not like any of them. Suddenly, Xinyu's figure jumped out from his mind, and a thought flashed through his mind. If he wants to marry, he would marry someone like Xinyu. When this thought flashed through his mind, it was as if his head was struck by lightning. Xinyu was a man. God, how could he have this kind of thought? Could it be that he was gay? Rongyue Tianheng's heart was like a fire, and he was a little dazed. The sound transmission talisman on his waist lit up, and it lit up with a light blue luster. He was a little puzzled. He hadn't set any of his friends' voice transmissions to be of this color. He casually picked up the call, and the voice of the eighth cousin brother who had been waiting for a long time came out of the voice transmitting charm. Tianheng, I have something to do and can't come back. Please send Princess Tianyue back. After a few simple words, the voice transmission talisman was extinguished. Rongyushinheng, naturally, Ji Tianyue, who was at the side, also heard it. She finally burst into tears, feeling extremely wronged. Rongyue Tianheng looked at her sympathetically and felt that she should be wronged. This little girl had injured her leg for nothing and was still bleeding until now. The only problem was how to send the little girl back. He did not want to carry her like a princess. He felt that his princess carry should be reserved for the woman he liked. But this little girl's leg was injured so badly that she probably couldn't walk on her own. Rongjuishan Huan rubbed his forehead with a headache. Did he just shoot himself in the foot? Ji Tianyue probably couldn't bear the disappointment and continued to throw a tantrum. I don't want you to send me off. I want him to come back and pick me up. Sob sob, I might as well just die here. Chapter 27:10. Before she could finish her sentence, Rongyue Tianhuan's hand chopped over, directly knocking her unconscious. Then, he casually summoned a donkey, threw Ji Tianyu onto the donkey, and flew down the mountain with the donkey. Sunlight shone in through the window screen, sprinkling spots of light on the ground. A warm blanket, a soft bed, and a soft and slippery curtain. Ji Xinyu sat at the head of the bed with a human-shaped doll in her arms. She was a little confused. The human-shaped doll was almost as long as a person. It was soft and looked very delicate. It was very comfortable to hold. Ji Xinyu looked at the doll in her arms and then looked around. No matter how she thought about it, she couldn't understand what was going on. She was used to being independent. No matter where she drank, she would control the amount and not let herself get drunk. She didn't want any accidents to happen and there was no one to save her. Last night, she didn't feel really drunk. At most, she felt a little dizzy. After Rongyue Tianlan carried her down the mountain, he put her down under her strong protest. She remembered that she had thanked him properly and bade him goodbye. He didn't say anything. Then, she walked out of the mountain, and then what was it again? Her dizziness got worse and worse, and her drunkenness got stronger and stronger. Only then did she understand how strong Rongyue Tianlan's jar of wine was. She had drunk more than half of the jug of wine. When the mountain wind blew, she felt the whole world shaking. She felt that she probably couldn't withstand it, so she wanted to find a cave to sober up first. After resting for a while, she would think of a way to go back after the alcohol had subsided. Then she found a cave as expected. But that cave had an owner, and it was an extremely irritable owner. It was a huge unicorn. Unicorns were herbivores. Usually, it was better to stay away from it and not provoke it. It didn't like to talk to people. But Ji Xinyu came to snatch its cave. This pissed it off. Ordinary cultivators didn't dare to provoke this kind of beast because it had thick skin and a lot of blood. It was hard to kill, and it was the kind of master that wouldn't rest until it was dead. Once provoked, it would be even more sticky than a dog's skin plaster. If Ji Xinyu was fine, this kind of beast was no match for her. She could deal with it in a quarter of an hour. However, she was drunk at that time and couldn't even stand properly. She also couldn't use her spiritual power, so it was dangerous for her to encounter such a big guy. She vaguely remembered that she was half sober from her drunken stupor and fought with the unicorn for almost an hour. She even vomited all over the big fellow, and then Ji Xinyu hugged the doll and stared blankly at the top of the tent for a moment. She realized that she couldn't remember anything. The sound of her waking up alarmed the personal maid that her imperial father had just assigned to her, Xiaoqing. This little girl was quite smart, she did things quickly, and was also loyal to Ji Xinyu. When she saw Ji Xinyu open her eyes, she immediately ran in happily to greet her. "Princess, you're awake. His Highness Rongyu is right, you should wake up at this time. Are you hungry? Do you want some porridge?" The little girl spoke like a machine gun, but Ji Xinyu caught the main point from her words. She paused for a moment. How did I come back? That 8th Highness Rongyu has already come to visit me. Xiaoqing giggled and said, "Princess, you were brought back by Her Highness Rongyu." The doll in Ji Xinyu's arms fell to the ground. What? Xiaoqing hurriedly picked up the doll, patted the dust off it, and put it back in her arms. Chapter 27:11. Xiaoqing quickly picked up the doll and patted the dust off it before putting it back in her arms. "Princess, you drank too much last night. His Highness Rongyue carried you in directly and gave me a fright. After His Highness Rongyue put you down, he told me to take good care of you. He said that you would be hungry if you woke up around this time, so he asked me to prepare some plain porridge and iced nut soup. His Highness Rongyue really cares for you, and I am happy for you. Princess, I will ask someone to bring the porridge and soup up. Shao Qing left like a gust of wind. Ji Xinyue's mind was in a daze. She looked at herself and saw that she was wearing a soft nightgown. It was not the same as last night. Who changed it for her? Could it be, did he see through her identity? The veins on Ji Xinyue's forehead throbbed. She raised her hand and rubbed the space between her eyebrows again and again, desperately trying to think of what to do next, but her mind was blank, and she still could not think of anything. While she was in a daze, Shao Qing ran back like a gust of wind with a food box. She placed 2 bowls of fragrant porridge and soup on the table. Ji Xinyue got up to wash up and asked leisurely, "Where did this doll come from? Who changed my clothes for me?" "I was the one who helped your highness change your clothes, but your highness had been hugging the doll all this time. I was afraid that it would press on you, so I wanted to move it to the side, but your highness kept hugging it tightly and refused to let go." Did Rongyue Tianlan buy this doll for her? Speaking of which, why did he buy this for her? Could it be that she accidentally said that she liked dolls when she was drunk? She seemed to have thought of something. "Shao Qing, where are the old clothes that I changed out of?" She was wearing men's robes when she went out, and she was also wearing the same clothes when she drank with Rongyue Tianlan. If she was wearing the clothes that Rongyue Tianlan carried back, then there was no doubt that her identity had been seen through by him. "Here." Shao Qing took a small package from the side and opened it, revealing a light red dress. "Your Highness's clothes are here. I was going to wash them today." Ji Xinyue was stunned. This dress was what she usually wore in the palace. When she went out, she should have put it in her storage space to change into when she returned to the palace. He was so drunk last night, how could he change his clothes? If she didn't change it herself, then Rongyue Tianlan must have helped her change it. This thought caused her heart to skip a beat. Heat spread across her cheeks. "Princess, your face is so red. Is the room too hot? Last night, Her Highness Rongyue sent you back and said that drunk people are afraid of the cold and should not catch a cold. She specially ordered this servant to put a brazier in this room." Shao Qing was good at observing people's expressions. Ji Xinyue finished the porridge and soup in 2 or 3 mouthfuls, and put the bowl on the table. "Take your time to clean up, I'm going out for a bit." In the blink of an eye, she disappeared. Little Qing, where was the princess going in such a hurry? Ji Xinyue rushed straight into Rongyue Tianlan's courtyard. She didn't want to have a bunch of questions in her stomach. She wanted to ask him clearly. However, she missed. Rongyue Tianlan was not there. Only the 2 palace servants who served him were cleaning up the flowers and plants outside the hall. Seeing her rush in, the 2 palace servants raised their eyebrows in surprise. Although Ji Xinyue and Rongyue Tianlan lived next door, Ji Xinyue rarely came to this courtyard. Chapter 27:12. Although Ji Xinyue and Rongyue Tianlan lived next door, Ji Xinyue rarely came to this courtyard. Most of the time, it was Rongyue Tianlan who went to treat her illness. It was the first time she was in such a hurry like today. Ji Xinyue was too lazy to beat around the bush. "Where is Her Highness Rongyue?" The 2 people finally reacted, one of them stuttering. "Her Highness went to the little Princess Crystal Moon Palace early in the morning. She should be back soon." Ji Xinyue didn't know why, but her heart sank slightly, as if a small bubble in the depths of her heart burst with a pop, but she didn't feel it, only frowning slightly. She went to Ji Tianyue's place early in the morning, what did this person mean by that? He was trying to please her and her sister. Should she still ask him the truth? She hesitated and thought about it, but the two people misunderstood and thought that she was jealous and unhappy. One of them hurriedly added, I heard that the little princess was injured last night, and Her Highness Rongyu went to treat her. As soon as he finished speaking, the third princess, who had been muttering to herself a moment ago, disappeared. The two people looked at each other again. The third princess was so skilled. The Crystal Moon Palace was the most dreamy place in the entire palace. Crystal tiles, tortoise-shell walls, coral walls, the entire palace was built like a crystal palace. In the courtyard, there were fake mountains, strange stones, and 9 winding corridors. The bottom of the corridor was hollow, paved with a kind of jade. When people stepped on it, it would make a tinkling sound, like playing a guqin. At this time, there was a chess table in this winding corridor, and the black and white chess pieces on the table were fighting fiercely. 2 people sat opposite each other at the table, one in blue and the other in pink. The one in blue was Rongyue Tianlan, and the one in pink was Ji Tianyue. Among the 4 virtues of a woman, besides needlework and cooking, if one was good at music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, it was also very glorious. Ji Tianyue was good at chess, but compared to Rongyue Tianlan, she was not even one universe away. As soon as the game started, she was defeated by him, and her army was utterly defeated. Rongyue Tianlan's slender fingers stretched out, and a chess piece fell, killing a large number of her chess pieces. Princess Ji Tianyue's small face blushed, and she pouted coquettishly, Brother Rongyue, can't you let me win? Rongyue Tian raised her hand and calmly tidied up the chess pieces on the chessboard. There is no father and son on the chessboard. This cannot be allowed. Your chess skills still need to be honed. Let's do it again next time. No, I want another round. I don't believe that I can't win even 1 stone. Princess Ji Tianyue's stubborn temper also rose. However, Rongyu Ishanlan was somewhat dispirited. It's getting late. Oh. You should go and have your meal. Or next time, no. Let's go for another round, okay? Ji Tianyue looked at him pitifully. Tianyue's legs don't hurt only when I play chess. Rongyue Tian didn't know why she was in a daze and didn't react for a while. Ji Tianyue waved her small hand in front of his eyes. Brother Rongyu. Rongyu Ishanlan finally regained his senses. He looked at the chessboard and then looked at Ji Tianyue opposite him. He raised his hand and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. All right, just 1 game. The black and white chess pieces fell on the chessboard again. Ji Tianyue excitedly opened her mouth. Brother Rongyue, your chess skills are amazing. I want to be as good as you. Can you teach me, please? If you teach me for a few years, maybe my chess skills can be on par with yours. Chapter 27:13. I'm still young after all, I've only learned for 300 years. Rongyu Ishanlan glanced at her and shook his head slightly. Chess skills were completely dependent on talent. The master could lead the way, but the cultivation depended on the individual. After learning the basic chess skills, the rest depended entirely on talent and perception. Ji Tianyue did not have such perception at all. Even if she learned chess for a few thousand years, she would still be as bad as she was today. Back then, Ning Xuema was only in her teens, but she was able to cause a storm and defeat him. Is that okay? Brother Rongyu. Ji Tianyue's big eyes were as clear as crystals. Rongyu Ishanlan's gaze swept across her eyes. His fingers paused for a moment before he finally agreed, okay. To play chess, you need to have qi. Only when you have qi can you practice well. If you hit the head, the tail will follow. He began to explain to her the ways to play chess and pointed out where to place each chess piece in her hand. The autumn wind blew and the autumn flowers bloomed. There was a Bodhi tree in the courtyard. The palm-sized Bodhi leaves were blown down by the wind and swirled down, occasionally landing on the chessboard or their clothes. The Bodhi leaves were golden yellow, contrasting with the pink flowers in the flower bed beside them. It was as beautiful as a painting. When Ji Tianyue rushed to the entrance of the Crystal Moon Palace, she saw this scene. She stood there and watched everything. She saw a leaf fall on Ji Tianyue's hair and was blown up by the wind. Ji Tianyue was focused on the chessboard and did not notice it at all. It was Rongyu Yishanlan's fingertips that flicked it away. Ji Tianyue seemed to have just noticed this and smiled sweetly. "Thank you, brother Rongyu." Her smile was like a blooming flower bud, beautiful and tender. Rongyu Yishanlan's gaze paused on her face for a moment before he looked away again. His gaze returned to the chessboard and he continued to point at her. They played chess as if there was no one else around, as if no one else was allowed to step in between them. Perhaps it was because they were too focused, but neither of them noticed Ji Xinyu standing outside the courtyard. Ji Tianyue stood there for a moment, then turned and left without saying a word. Just as he turned the corner, he bumped into the second princess, Ji Xinmeng. Ji Xinmeng was leaning over the railing to feed the fishes. When he saw her walk over, he raised his head and smiled. He said leisurely, "You saw that too. What does it feel like to see your fiancé and your sister together?" Ji Xinyu ignored her and walked past her. "Yo, you also have times when you feel so bad." This was really rare. "However, don't blame me for telling you the truth. You really don't deserve him. It would be better for you to leave as soon as possible." "Sister, I heard that yesterday evening, His Highness Rongyu personally went to see our imperial father, saying that he is interested in Tianyu and wants imperial father to give Tianyu to him." Ji Xinming's tone was sour and gloating. Ji Xinyu finally stopped and turned around to look at her. Ji Xinmeng felt that his words had a great effect and became even more proud. "Third sister, sometimes people have to know their own limits. No matter how good a phoenix is, it's not something a sparrow can match. Don't you think so?" Ji Xinyu suddenly smiled. "You're right, a sparrow is indeed not worthy of a phoenix. It seems like sister has been pining for him for thousands of years and even had the servant girls spread rumors about him being childhood sweethearts. You didn't hesitate to ruin your own reputation just to get involved with him. I don't know what sister went through, but you suddenly thought it through and realized that a sparrow is not worthy of a phoenix." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.